The day began the way most days did on the plantation, with the sound of iron speaking to iron. Chains shifted before the sun rose, metal rasping softly in the dark quarters as bodies stirred on dirt floors. Zephyra woke before the horn, as she always did. Sleep never held her long. It brushed past her like a cautious stranger, leaving behind images she did not ask for. Faces half remembered, paths half walked, the sensation of running without moving. She lay still, eyes open, counting breaths that were not hers. Around her, the others breathed in uneven rhythms, some shallow, some heavy with exhaustion. A child whimpered once, then fell silent when a woman's hand found his back. The air was damp, thick with old sweat and fear that had soaked into the wood long before Zephyra was born. Somewhere outside, insects hummed as if the night had no business ending. Zephyra listened past them, past the familiar noises of captivity, to the deeper sounds, the shift of boots on gravel, the clink of a rifle being lifted and set against a wall, the cough of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. She rolled onto her side and pushed herself upright without a sound. Her wrists bore scars from old iron, pale lines crossing dark skin like unfinished writing. She rubbed them absently, not in pain but in memory. Memory was dangerous. She had learned to keep it folded and stored, like a blade hidden in cloth. The horn blew. One long note, then another, tearing through the morning. Bodies rose all at once. Someone groaned, someone else whispered a prayer. Zephyra stood tall and straight, her face already settled into the expression she wore like a mask, empty, unremarkable, forgettable. The overseers liked people they did not have to think about. Outside, dawn bled slowly into the sky. The fields stretched outward, rows upon rows of cotton plants still wet with dew. The land looked peaceful at that hour, a lie so well practiced it might have believed itself. Zephyra took her place in line, hands folded, gaze lowered. She could feel the eyes on her, though no one lingered. She was known for working hard and speaking little. Those two traits brought her a certain invisibility. The overseer, Mr. Calhoun, walked the line with his whip coiled loose in his hand. He was a narrow man with a narrow mouth, the kind of man who believed cruelty was a sign of order. His boots were polished even here, even now. He stopped in front of a young boy who had stumbled while stepping forward. "Look at me," Calhoun said. The boy did not lift his head fast enough. The whip cracked. Sound first, pain second. The boy cried out, a sharp animal sound that cut through the morning. Zephyra's jaw tightened. Her fingers curled once, then relaxed. She did not look up. Looking was dangerous, too. "Anyone else?" Calhoun asked the line, his voice light, almost bored. No one answered. Silence was safer than truth. They moved to the fields. Work began. Hands reached and pulled, fingers bled, backs bent. Time stretched thin and endless. Zephyra worked steadily, her movements efficient, controlled. She had learned long ago how to make her labor look like obedience while keeping something of herself untouched. Each plant passed through her hands, each step placed carefully. She watched without appearing to watch. She listened without appearing to listen. The incident happened just before midday. It started with shouting near the far rows, voices raised in anger and panic. Work slowed, heads turning despite the risk. Calhoun swore and strode toward the noise, dragging two men with him. Zephyra kept working, though her attention sharpened. She knew that tone. She had heard it before, on other days, on other plantations. A woman had collapsed. Her name was Lissa. She was older, her body worn thin by years of labor. The heat had pressed down heavier than usual that morning, the sun unforgiving. Lissa lay on the ground, her breathing ragged, eyes unfocused. "Another one," and knelt beside her, whispering urgently, trying to lift her head. "She's faking," one of the men said. "She's dying," the kneeling woman replied, her voice trembling. Calhoun looked down at Lissa with annoyance, not concern. "Get up," he said, nudging her with his boot. Lissa did not move. "Get up." "Nothing." Calhoun sighed as if inconvenienced. He raised his whip. "Stop," Zephyra said. The word left her mouth before she had time to bury it. It hung in the air, small but unmistakable. Every sound seemed to vanish. Even the insects went quiet. Calhoun turned slowly. His eyes found Zephyra, narrowing, surprised. "What did you say?" Zephyra swallowed. She had spoken once too often in her life, always regretted it, but something had broken open inside her, a crack that had been waiting. "She can't work," Zephyra said carefully. "She'll die." A murmur rippled through the rows. Fear spread faster than heat. Calhoun's mouth twitched. "And if she does?" Zephyra met his gaze just for a moment, long enough to be seen. "Then you lose a worker." The wrong answer? The The whip came down hard, not on Lissa but across Zephyr's back. Pain exploded white-hot, stealing her breath. She fell to one knee, teeth clenched to keep the sound in. Another strike followed, then another. Each one carved fire into her skin, each one a message meant for everyone watching. "This," Calhoun said, striking again, "is what happens when you forget your place." Zephyra tasted blood. Her vision blurred, but she did not scream. Screaming gave them something. She would not give them that. When it ended, she lay on the ground beside Lissa, her body shaking. Someone dragged her back to her feet. Someone else took Lissa away, limp as a bundle of cloth. No one said where. Everyone knew. The work resumed. It always did. By the time the sun began its slow descent, Zephyra's back burned with every movement. Sweat stung the open wounds. Her hands shook, not from pain alone, but from the awareness of what she had done. She had been seen. Marked. That night she did not sleep. The quarters were quiet in a way that felt unnatural. People avoided her eyes. Fear did that. It spread outward, careful not to touch anything sharp. A woman pressed a rag into Zephyra's hand without speaking. Another left a piece of bread near her mat. Small kindnesses, offered like contraband. Zephyra lay on her side, staring at the wall. The pain ebbed and surged in waves. With it came clarity. She would not survive another day like this. She replayed the morning in her mind, every sound, every step. She thought of the paths she had walked carrying water, of the fence line near the woods, of the way the guards changed shifts at night. She thought of the swamp beyond the fields, the one everyone said swallowed people whole. She had seen it once from a distance, dark and endless, a place even the masters avoided. Impossible, they said. Death, they said. Zephyra closed her eyes. Impossible was a word used by those who never tried. Near midnight she heard it, boots again, closer this time. A voice outside the quarters. Calhoun, drunk and angry, laughing with another man. "She'll learn," he said, "or she'll break." Zephyra's fingers tightened around the rag. Something settled inside her then, quiet and final. Not rage, not despair. Decision. When the voices faded, she rose slowly, carefully. Every movement sent pain through her back, but pain was familiar. She eased toward the corner of the quarters where the wall had warped away from the frame. She had noticed it months ago, a weakness hidden in plain sight. She slipped her hand through, testing. The wood gave just enough. Outside, the night pressed close, heavy and wet. Clouds hid the moon. The world beyond the plantation breathed differently, deeper, freer. Zephyra paused, listening, counting heartbeats. No alarm, no shout. She stepped into the darkness. Behind her, the plantation slept, confident in its chains and rules and whips. Ahead of her lay something unnamed and vast. By morning, when the horn blew and the line formed with one space empty, panic would bloom. Dogs would be loosed. Men would ride hard and fast, convinced they were chasing a woman already dead. They would not yet understand what had begun at dawn. But Zephyra did, and she did not look back. The night swallowed Zephyra the moment she crossed the warped gap in the quarter's wall. The air outside was thicker than inside, damp with river breath and the sweet rot of late-season leaves. She held still for a long moment, letting her eyes adjust, letting her heartbeat find a quieter rhythm. Behind her, the quarters stood dark and crowded with sleeping bodies. Ahead, the plantation opened like a wide, waiting mouth. Yards of trampled earth, the outlines of tool sheds and fences, the pale geometry of the big house farther off, and beyond that, the fields and the tree line and the unknown. Pain pulsed across her back every time she drew a breath. The whip marks had tightened into angry ridges. Sweat ran down her sides and stung where it touched broken skin. She welcomed the sting. It kept her awake. It kept her present. Tonight, presence was survival. She moved low, barefoot, stepping where the dirt was softest. She avoided the scattered gravel that would betray her. She had watched the yard for months, where men liked to spit, where they liked to stand and boast, where the dogs were kept, where the lanterns hung. Knowledge didn't free you by itself, but it gave you something sharper than hope, options. Somewhere near the tool shed, a board creaked. Zephyra froze. Her body went still so completely that she could feel each heartbeat in her throat. A lantern lifted, light smeared across the yard in a slow arc. A man yawned, scratching his belly, his rifle hanging loose. He didn't look in her direction, not truly. He looked the way men looked when they believed the world belonged to them, carelessly, lazily, expecting nothing but obedience. Zephyra waited until the lantern turned away. until the man leaned against the shed and let his head droop. Then she slid forward again, using the shadow of a fence post, then a stack of split wood, then the darker strip where the earth dipped. The dogs were the true danger. Men could be distracted. Dogs never forgot their purpose. The kennel sat behind the stable, close enough to the overseer's cabin that he could hear the barking and feel reassured. She could smell them before she saw them: wet fur, sour breath, the sharp, musky stink of animals trained to hunt people. A soft whine rose as she passed, as if one of them dreamed with its nose open. Zephyra crouched and reached into the pocket of her dress where she'd hidden a small lump of tallow from the kitchen days earlier. It had softened in the heat and stuck to the cloth. She scraped it free with her fingernail, then rubbed it between her palms until it warmed. With slow, careful movements, she smeared it over her wrists and along her forearms, then over the front of her dress and the sides of her neck. She did not know if it would truly confuse their scent, but she had seen kitchen women rub grease on themselves to ward off biting insects, and she had seen the dogs lose interest in certain scraps that had been soaked in fat and smoke. Tonight, she used every small guess she had. She moved past the kennel, not running, never running. Running made noise. Running made panic. Panic made mistakes. Beyond the stable was the fence line. It ran long and straight, a boundary meant to be absolute.
Zephyra had walked it before, carrying water, carrying sacks, carrying whatever weight they placed in her hands.
She knew where the posts leaned, where the wire sagged, where the ground dipped. One section near a cluster of thorn bushes had always looked weaker than the rest, as if the land itself didn't respect the fence. She found it now in the dark, guided by the scent of the thorn flowers, the memory of splinters in her fingers. The wire was rough. She slipped her hands beneath the lowest strand and lifted just enough to slide her body through, careful not to let the metal sing. The thorns scratched her arms, drawing small lines of blood. She didn't flinch. Pain was cheaper than being caught. On the other side, the world changed. The yard noises faded. The air grew wilder. Crickets seemed louder. The ground under her feet shifted from packed dirt to softer earth and tangled roots. She was not free yet. Freedom was a distance, not a step. But she had left the place where their rules were strongest. She stayed close to the fence for a while, moving parallel to it instead of straight away. If they noticed she was gone soon, they would assume she ran for the road, for the river, for any obvious path. They would ride those lines hard. So Zephyra moved like a shadow that refused to behave. Her plan, if it could be called that, was built from observation and a single terrifying truth: the swamp. They feared the swamp. The masters and overseers spoke of it like it was a living thing that swallowed men whole. They told stories of quicksand, snakes, fevers that cooked a person from the inside. They used it as a warning to keep people from trying. But Zephyra had also seen something else. Patrols never went deep into it. Dogs didn't like it. Horses refused it. Fear was a fence, too. She intended to climb that one. She reached the first line of trees before the clouds shifted and a thin sliver of moonlight slid out. The trunks stood like dark pillars. Leaves whispered above her head. The smell of pine and damp moss filled her lungs. She kept moving, following the lowest ground, where her footprints would be less obvious. She stepped on stones when she could, on roots, on fallen branches that already carried the marks of animals. Hours passed without meaning. The night was no longer time, it was distance. Every so often she stopped and listened, turning her head like an animal. Twice she heard voices far off, men laughing, a bottle clinking, the careless noise of those who felt safe. Once she heard the distant bark of a dog and felt her muscles lock, but the sound faded again. Swallowed by trees. Her thirst grew sharp. She had not brought water. Water was heavy. Water sloshed. Water tempted you to follow roads and wells. She had decided on a different kind of risk. She found a low stream, its surface black, moving slowly between stones. She knelt, cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted of mud and leaf rot. It was cold enough to make her teeth ache. She drank anyway. When she stood, she noticed something pale on the ground, a scrap of cloth, torn and snagged on a branch. It fluttered faintly in the breeze. Zephyra stared at it, the way one stares at an omen. It could have been nothing, some discarded rag, or it could have been proof that someone else had come this way and not returned. She left it where it was. She would not carry other people's fear. By the time the sky began to lighten at the edges, she had reached the first true stretch of swamp. The trees changed, the ground sank, roots rose out of the water like the backs of old animals. The air grew warmer, thicker, full of buzzing insects and a smell like wet iron. Mist hung low. It was not a place meant for people. Zephyra stepped in anyway. The water took her ankles at first, then her calves. Mud sucked at her feet. She moved carefully, testing each step with a branch she broke from a low tree. The branch sank, met something solid, then slid sideways into softer mud. She adjusted. She learned the swamp's language in small, urgent lessons. Birds called overhead, harsh and sudden. Something splashed nearby, an unseen body moving through the dark water. Zephyra kept her breathing steady. Panic would drown her faster than water. She pushed deeper until the light behind her turned into a thin grey line. The plantation was somewhere beyond that line now. Somewhere that felt less real with every step. She wanted to believe she could keep walking until the world forgot her name. But the world did not forget people easily. It hunted them. Sometime after midday she heard the horn. Not the plantation's morning horn. The sound carried differently, stretched and warped by distance. This was a signal horn, used by riders. It rose and fell once, then again. A call meant to gather men, to announce urgency. They had found her absence. Zephyra crouched behind a cypress trunk and pressed her forehead against the bark. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what was coming. Dogs would be loosed. Patrols would ride the roads, then the edges of the woods. Men with rifles and ropes would spread out, confident they could pull a single woman back like a stray animal. She forced her mind into motion. They would search the obvious. They would search the places that made sense to them. The swamp would not make sense. She went deeper. By the second night, her body began to argue with her decisions. Her feet were raw, the skin torn in places where mud and roots had rubbed it away. Her dress clung to her, heavy with swamp water. The whip marks on her back had reopened in several spots, each movement drawing fresh pain. She did not stop. Stopping meant the gap between her and them would shrink. At twilight, she found a small rise, hard ground no bigger than a table, covered in moss and a few stubborn ferns. It was the first dry place she had seen in hours. She stepped onto it like it was sacred. She did not sleep. Sleep was a trap, but she allowed herself to rest, crouched with her knees to her chest, arms wrapped around her body. She ate nothing. Hunger was quieter than fear, but it grew. Her stomach cramped, then settled into a dull ache. In the distance she heard dogs. The sound threaded through the swamp like a rope being pulled. It came and went, closer, then farther, as if the swamp itself was confusing them. Zephyra held her breath every time it swelled. She kept her eyes on the dark water around her, watching for ripples that did not belong to wind. A lantern glowed faintly through the trees at one point, a pale yellow eye moving along the edge of the swamp. Zephyra stayed still, her body pressed low, her hands sunk into the moss. The lantern bobbed, stopped, then moved again. Voices murmured. She caught fragments, cursing, annoyance, impatience. "You sure she went in there?" Someone said. "Ain't no other tracks," another replied. "She'll be dead by morning." Zephyra's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. She waited until the lantern disappeared. Only then did she move again, sliding off the rise and back into the water, letting the swamp close around her like a cloak. On the third day, fever tried to take her. It began as chills, even in the heat. Her skin prickled, her teeth chattered. Then the swamp air seemed to thicken, pressing into her lungs. Her thoughts blurred at the edges. She found herself staring too long at a leaf, forgetting why she was moving, forgetting which direction meant farther from danger. That frightened her more than the dogs. She forced herself to drink water again, even though it tasted worse deeper in. She chewed on the soft inner bark of a tree she recognized from kitchen fires, bitter, but it gave her something to put in her stomach. She moved slower, choosing steps with more care, refusing to let dizziness make choices for her. By the afternoon the fever eased a little, not gone, but held at bay by stubbornness. That night the swamp gave her a gift, rain. A heavy storm rolled in, sudden and violent. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain hammered the water, erasing ripples and softening sounds. The world became noise. Men would not search well in this. Dogs would struggle. Tracks would vanish. Zephyra moved during the storm. She waded through rising water, using lightning flashes to see the shapes of trees. Rain ran down her face, and into her mouth. She drank without stopping. Her dress clung tighter, but she welcomed it. Anything that made her look more like part of the swamp than something separate. When the storm finally passed, she found herself at a different kind of edge, not the plantation's edge, but the swamp's inner boundary, where the land rose slightly and the trees thinned into a ragged line. Beyond it lay a stretch of forest that looked older, less disturbed. The air smelled cleaner. There were fewer insects. The swamp behind her seemed to exhale. Zephyra stood there for a long time, trembling, not from cold now, but from the realization that she had crossed something most people never even dared to approach. She was not safe. She knew that. Safety was a luxury, and she did not yet have it. But she had done the impossible thing they counted on to keep her contained. She had stepped into the place they feared and walked through it. At dawn, far behind her, men would find nothing but soaked earth and confusion. Dogs would circle, then lose the trail. Riders would curse the swamp, call it cursed, call it hungry. They would return to the plantation with empty hands and angry hearts. And then the stories would begin. Some would say Zephyra drowned. Some would say she was taken by beasts. Some would say she never existed at all, that people imagined her absence because they wanted to believe someone could slip through the cracks. But the truth was simpler and sharper. She had vanished because she had chosen to become unfindable. She stepped forward into the new forest, leaving no trail anyone would recognize, and the morning light touched her face like it had never been allowed to before. Not freedom, not yet, but a direction, and a woman walking it. The forest beyond the swamp did not welcome Zephyra the way she had imagined freedom might. It did not open its arms or offer her a path. It simply existed, tall, indifferent, older than the plantation and the men who owned it. The trees rose in quiet ranks, trunks dark with moisture, branches threaded together so tightly overhead that the light became a thin, broken net. The air smelled of pine resin and wet earth, clean enough to make her chest ache. She walked until the swamp sounds faded completely. Even then she did not stop. Her mind would not allow it. Stopping meant imagining hands on her shoulders, iron closing on her wrists, dogs leaping from behind a trunk. Her body moved from habit now, guided by a fear that had learned to speak in calm tones. By midday her legs began to tremble, not from cowardice. She had moved beyond that word, but from hunger and the fever that still lurked behind her eyes. She could feel it in the slight sway of the world, in the way her thoughts occasionally slipped and returned like a leaf caught in current. She found a small hollow between two fallen trees where the ground lifted just enough to stay dry. It was no shelter anyone would choose, but it was hidden from most angles, and that mattered more than comfort. She lowered herself carefully, then lay on her side, face turned toward the direction she'd come from, listening. Silence here was different. The plantation silence was forced, sharp, full of swallowed words. The swamp silence was heavy and alive, hiding movement. This forest silence was wide, full of distant bird calls and the soft whisper of leaves. It carried the sense that life went on whether she lived or died. Zephyra closed her eyes for a moment and let her body rest without surrendering to sleep. She counted breaths again. When her thoughts tried to drift into memory, the whip, the horn, Lissa's body being dragged away, she pushed them aside like smoke. She needed a plan. Not the kind men boasted about with maps and numbers, but a plan made of small decisions: what she would drink, what she would eat, how she would keep her direction, how she would keep from being seen. She sat up and examined her hands. The pads of her fingers were splul, it from cotton work, and now the cuts had filled with swamp grime. Her nails were cracked. Her palms trembled slightly. She pressed her thumb into the base of her fingers until the shaking eased. Panic lived in the body first. She could not afford to let it build a home there. She rose and moved quietly through the undergrowth, searching for water. The forest did not make it easy. Streams ran hidden, and the ground rolled in gentle rises that tricked her sense of direction. She learned quickly to watch the plants. Where ferns clustered thicker, the earth was softer. Where the air cooled in narrow pockets, there was likely water. Near late afternoon she heard it, a faint trickle. She followed the sound, stepping carefully, and found a thin stream cutting through stones. It was clearer than the swamp water, and she nearly cried from relief. She knelt, cupped her hands, and drank slowly. It tasted like stone and leaf and something sharp she could not name, but it did not taste like rot. She drank until her stomach cramped. When she stood, she caught her reflection in the stream for the first time since leaving. Her face was streaked with mud. Her eyes looked too large in the hollows of her cheeks, her hair had loosened, curls tangled with bits of moss. Her dress clung to her, torn at the hem, stained dark by swamp water. She looked like a creature that belonged to the woods, and for a strange moment that felt like armor. As she turned away, she froze. A line of prints in the soft mud by the water's edge, small, barefoot, not hers. They were older than an hour, maybe 2. The edges had softened slightly. Whoever made them had stopped here, drank, then moved on. Zephyra's heartbeat thudded hard. Her mind instantly offered dangers, but tense. Zephyra waited until the sound was close enough that she could smell the other person. A hint of smoke, old sweat, and something like crushed herbs. She rolled silently onto her side, arching her shoulders, watching the ground, watching for any sign that this was a lead into danger. They moved through the trees without speaking. Mara seemed to know the terrain, avoiding low branches that would slap, stepping over roots rather than on them. Twice she stopped to listen, head tilted. Each time Zephyra mirrored her, listening too. The forest was full of small lives, all moving in their own patterns, but no human voices, no hunting calls. After some time, the land lifted slightly. The air cooled. The trees thinned just enough that moonlight painted pale lines across the ground. Ahead, Zephyra saw a shallow depression sheltered by fallen logs and thick brush. A faint orange glow pulsed from within, firelight carefully hidden. Zephyra's body tensed. Fire was comfort, but fire was also betrayal. Smoke carried. Light carried. Only people who didn't understand danger made fire in open places. But here the glow was low, shielded, as if someone knew exactly how much they could risk. Mara slipped into the hollow and whispered something too soft to hear. A figure moved. Then another. 2 people emerged from shadow, both thin and wary. One was a man older than Mara, perhaps in his 30s. His hair was cropped close, his eyes were sharp and suspicious. The other was a woman, older, her face lined with exhaustion. She held a stick like a weapon, the end charred from the fire. When they saw Zephyra, both stiffened. "Who that?" the man demanded, voice low but edged. Mara lifted her hands slightly. "She's run," Mara said quickly. "Like us. I followed her. She ain't with them." The older woman studied Zephyra, eyes narrowing. "How we know," she murmured. Zephyra stepped forward just enough that the firelight caught her scars, her torn dress, the fresh whip marks that darkened her back like a map of pain. She did not speak at first. She let them see what the system had written on her skin. The man's gaze flicked to her back, then away. Something in his expression shifted, a hardness loosening into grim understanding. "Name?" he asked. Zephyra held his eyes. "Zephyra," she said. The older woman repeated it softly, tasting the name. "Zephyra," she echoed, then looked down at the ground. "That a strong name." "It's mine," Zephyra replied. The man glanced at Mara, then at the older woman. They exchanged a look full of unspoken calculations, risk, hunger, fear. Zephyra recognized the look. It was the look of people deciding whether kindness would kill them. The older woman finally lowered her stick a fraction. "I'm Ruth," she said. "That's Eli." Zephyra nodded once. Names were bridges, dangerous but necessary. Ruth gestured toward the fire. "Sit," she said, still cautious, "but you keep your ears open. We don't sleep deep." Zephyra sank onto the earth near the edge of the hollow, close enough to the warmth to ease the ache in her bones, but far enough to jump up if she needed. Mara sat near her, eyes fixed on Zephyra, as if she feared the woman might vanish if she looked away. Eli pulled something from a small bundle, 2 handfuls of dried berries and a strip of jerky so tough it looked like bark. He broke the strip into 3 pieces, then hesitated, then broke it into 4. He handed one to Zephyra without meeting her eyes. Zephyra stared at the food for a moment. Her stomach surged with longing. She forced herself to eat slowly. Fast eating would make her sick. The berries were sour. The jerky tasted like smoke and salt. It was the best thing she had ever eaten. As they ate, Ruth kept her gaze on the darkness beyond the hollow. "Where you come from?" she asked. Zephyra chewed and swallowed. "South," she said, which meant nothing and everything. "Plantation near the river." Eli snorted quietly. "All of them near the river," he muttered. Ruth's eyes shifted to Zephyra's back again. "You left tonight?" she asked. Zephyra shook her head. 3 nights, she said. "Swamp." Mara inhaled sharply. Eli's eyebrow. Eli's lifted, disbelief flickering. Ruth's mouth tightened. "You went through," Ruth murmured, half to herself. "I went," Zephyra said. "They don't follow deep." Eli stared at the fire. "Some do," he said grimly. "Some don't come back." Zephyra's gaze sharpened. You seen them? Eli hesitated, then nodded once. Seen hunters, he said. Not like overseers, worse. Men paid to bring you back alive, or bring your head if they can't. Mara's hands tightened around her knees. Ruth's jaw clenched. The hollow seemed to shrink with the weight of the words. Zephyra held the fear without letting it drown her. How long you been out? She asked. Ruth looked up at the trees as if searching for the answer in the leaves. 6 days, she said. Feels like 6 years. Eli spat to the side. We been moving, he said. Always moving. Can't stay nowhere long. Zephyra studied the hollow, the way the fallen logs shielded the fire, the way brush formed a wall, the way sound would be muffled here. She listened to the forest beyond, picking out patterns. It was a decent hiding place for a night or two, but if hunters were close, fire could betray them. Put it out, Zephyr said suddenly. Eli looked at her sharply. What? The fire, Zephyr repeated, voice calm, certain. Smoke carries, light carries. You want warmth, bury coals, no flame. Mara's eyes widened. Ruth's brows knit. Then she looked at the fire as if seeing it differently. Eli bristled, pride rising. You been out 3 nights, he said, defensive. We been out 6. We know. You know comfort, Zephyra cut in quietly. Not harsh, just true. You want to live, you learn discomfort. The words hung between them. Ruth's shoulders sagged and she reached for a stick to stir the fire lower. Eli stared at Zephyra, anger and respect battling behind his eyes. Mara looked relieved, as if someone had finally spoken the fear she'd been trying not to feed. Ruth scooped damp earth over the flames until only a dull red glow remained. The hollow darkened. The warmth faded, but the risk shrank too. Zephyra leaned back against a log, eyes half-lidded, listening. The forest was not silent. It never was. But she had learned to hear what didn't belong, a twig snapped too heavy for deer, a breath that wasn't wind. You got a direction? Eli asked after a long pause. Zephyra stared into the dark. Direction. The word felt heavy. She had been moving away, not toward. North, she said finally. It was the only honest answer she had. North meant distance. North meant rumor. North meant the faint possibility of a place where chains were not law. Ruth exhaled. Everybody say north, she murmured. Zephyra turned her head slightly. You got better? Ruth hesitated, then shook her head. I got tired, she said. I got hunger. I got a girl who cry in her sleep. She glanced at Mara, whose face tightened, ashamed. Ruth's gaze softened. I got no better. Zephyra looked at Mara. The girl's eyes were bright even in the darkness. She was trying to be brave so hard it was tearing her open. Zephyra recognized that too. Zephyra made another decision, one she could feel shaping the future even if she could not yet see it. You follow me, Zephyra said quietly. Eli blinked. What you mean? I mean you do what I say when I say it, Zephyra replied. No arguing loud, no fire, no walking together in open, no leaving scraps, no singing, no praying out loud. She held Eli's gaze. You want freedom, you act like you already got it. Silent, smart. Eli's jaw clenched, pride flared again, but fear had its own weight. He glanced at Ruth. Ruth's eyes met his and she nodded once, slow. We do that, Ruth said, voice steady. We do that if it keep us alive. Mara's breath caught. Yes, she whispered quickly, as if afraid the offer might disappear. Yes, I will. Eli looked back at Zephyra. You ain't no preacher, he said. Ain't no captain neither. Zephyra's expression did not change. No, she agreed. A woman who walked through the swamp. That ended the argument. They rested in shifts that night, the way animals did when danger circled. Zephyra slept for short stretches, waking at every change in sound. Once she jolted awake to Mara whispering her name, panicked. Hear that? Mara breathed. Zephyra listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint far off like a memory, a dog bark. Not close, but real. Zephyra sat up and pressed a finger to her lips. They all went still, even Eli. The bark came again, then faded. Zephyra's mind moved like a blade. Dogs meant hunters. Hunters meant time running thin. At the first grey hint of dawn, she woke them all. No horn here, no whip, just her voice, low and firm. Up, she whispered, now. Ruth rose without complaint. Mara scrambled to her feet. Eli frowned but moved. They buried the last warm coals under damp earth, scattered leaves over the disturbed ground, erased any obvious sign that 4 bodies had slept there. Zephyra made them walk to the stream and step in it, letting water swallow their footprints for several yards before they climbed out and moved through rockier ground. They did not speak. Zephyra kept them spaced apart, far enough that one mistake would not doom the others, close enough that she could signal with a raised hand or a bird call mimic. She used the forest itself as cover, moving along ridges where wind carried scent away, then dropping into ravines where sound did not travel far. By midday, the fever was gone from Zephyra's head, replaced by something colder, focus. Hunger remained, but hunger was honest. It told you what you needed. Fear lied. It told you were already dead. They found food where they could. Nuts, roots Ruth recognized, a rabbit Eli snared with a crude loop of vine. They ate sparingly. Zephyra made them keep moving even when their legs begged to stop. Late afternoon they reached a place where the trees thinned, and the land opened into a small clearing. In the center stood the remains of an old cabin, collapsed roof, moss-covered logs, a chimney still standing like a broken tooth. The clearing was quiet, the kind of quiet that made a person suspicious. Eli stepped forward automatically, drawn by the idea of shelter. Zephyra caught his arm and pulled him back hard. He turned, surprised and irritated, but one look at her face stopped him. "Why?" he whispered. Zephyra pointed, barely moving her hand. In the soft mud at the clearing's edge were boot prints, fresh, deeper than theirs, made by men with weight and purpose. Near the cabin, broken twigs lay in a pattern too neat to be accidental. And there, half hidden in grass, was a coil of rope, a trap. Mara's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. Ruth's face went pale. "They been here," Ruth whispered. Zephyra nodded once. "They looking," she said. Eli swallowed, anger drained into fear. "How you see that?" Zephyra's gaze stayed on the clearing. "Because they think like owners," she murmured. "They think you run to shelter. They think you tired enough to walk into it." She turned away and led them back into the trees, leaving the clearing untouched, unentered. Behind them, the cabin waited like a patient lie. As the sun dipped and shadows lengthened, Zephyra did not feel despair. She felt something else, something harder, more dangerous. They were being hunted, yes, but the hunters were learning her name now, even if they did not know it. They were setting traps in the places fear would push people, and Zephyra was learning their patterns too. That night, as they crouched beneath thick branches, with no fire, no light, only the dark and each other's breathing, Zephyra stared into the forest and felt a thought take shape. Quiet, sharp, unstoppable. Survival was not enough. If she could learn to vanish, she could also learn to move others through the same darkness. If she could read the land, she could build something in it, something hidden, something that did not obey their rule. She did not say it out loud yet. Words were heavy, and she was still measuring the strength of the people beside her. But she felt it, steady as her own pulse. The swamp had not swallowed her. The forest would not either. And somewhere behind them, men were learning what it meant to chase a woman who had stopped running like prey. Night in the forest was not darkness the way the plantation night had been. Plantation darkness still had edges, lanterns swinging on porches, moonlight falling on open yards, the faint outline of fences meant to keep bodies in place. Forest darkness had no such courtesy. It pressed in from every side, thick as cloth, full of moving sounds that never showed their faces. The first time Zephyra had stepped into it alone, she'd felt as if the world had erased her. Now, with three others breathing around her, the dark felt different, not safer, but more complicated, more fragile. They had settled into a rhythm Zephyra insisted on. No fire, no straight lines, no staying in the same place 2 nights in a row. They slept in shifts, Ruth first, then Eli, then Zephyra, then Mara, so at least one set of eyes remained open at all times. Zephyra did not trust comfort. Comfort made people careless. Carelessness was how owners reclaimed what they thought belonged to them. In the early hours before dawn, Zephyra woke to a whisper of movement and the faintest scent of smoke, distant, not from their buried coals, but carried on the air. Smoke meant a camp meant people. People meant risk. She sat up slowly, easing the stiffness from her legs. The whip marks on her back had scabbed and cracked and scabbed again. Each movement pulled at them. She had learned to move as if pain was simply a weather she could not change. Ruth lifted her head from the moss bed. "You smell it too," Ruth murmured. Zephyra nodded once. She glanced at Mara, who slept with her knees drawn up like a child. Even asleep, the girl's face was tense, as if she expected the forest to strike her. Eli was awake already, staring into the dark with eyes that tried to look fearless and failed. "Could be hunters," Eli whispered. "Could be run," Zephyra answered. Eli's jaw tightened. "Or both." Zephyra didn't argue. The world was full of both. She raised 2 fingers and pointed, then lowered them, a signal she had taught them. "Stay. Silent. Watch." She slid forward through the undergrowth, moving low, following the faint smoke scent as if it were a thread. She kept to shadowed dips in the ground, stepping on stones, avoiding dry leaves. The forest surface was a language. Zephyra had begun to read it. After 15 minutes, she saw the first sign, a broken branch snapped too cleanly, not by wind, but by a hand. A footprint in soft earth, half filled with water, the heel deeper than the toes, someone carrying weight. Ahead, the smoke thickened. Zephyra climbed a small rise and peered through brush. Below, in a shallow hollow, a fire burned low under a makeshift shield of branches. 2 figures crouched near it. One stirred something in a pot, the other hunched with hands extended toward the warmth. A third figure lay farther back, barely moving. They were thin. Their clothes were torn. Their posture was that of people who had been chased for days. No rifles, no lanterns, no boots. Zephyra watched for several breaths, waiting for the moment the scene revealed itself as a lie, but it didn't. The figures moved with the slow caution of runaways, not the confident purpose of hunters. Zephyra slid back down the rise and returned to her group the way she'd come, leaving no new sign. 3, she whispered when she reached them. "Run, fire to open, but they're not hunters." Ruth's eyes sharpened. "You sure?" "Not sure," Zephyra admitted, "but I'm not leaving them blind in the woods either." Eli exhaled. "Or hands. More ways to survive." Eli looked away, but he didn't argue again. He was learning that Zephyra did not speak without weighing her words. When she decided something, it was because her mind had already walked through the consequences. They moved toward the hollow with Zephyra leading. She stopped them a good distance away, raised her fist. "Halt." Then she slipped forward alone again, approaching openly enough to be seen, but quietly enough not to startle. When she was close, she stood and let her shape appear between 2 trees. The figure nearest the pot spun, grabbing a stick as if it were a weapon. The other rose too fast, panic flashing. The one lying back groaned and tried to lift his head. "Don't," Zephyra said softly, holding her hands low and open. "No shouting." The stick holder trembled, then steadied. In the weak light of their fire, Zephyra saw a woman, maybe in her 20s, her hair braided tight against her scalp. Her eyes were sharp, suspicious. The other was a man, older, his beard patchy, his cheek hollow. The third, lying down, was younger than both, maybe a boy near Mara's age, sweat shining on his forehead. "Who are you?" the woman demanded, voice low but fierce. "Run," Zephyra said. "Like you." The man's gaze flicked to Zephyra's back, to the scars visible through torn cloth. His expression shifted, wary but understanding. "You alone?" he asked. Zephyra didn't answer with words. She lifted her chin slightly. In the shadows behind her, Ruth stepped into view first, then Mara, then Eli, all at a distance, all silent. The woman tightened her grip on the stick. "That don't make you safe," she said. "It don't," Zephyra agreed. "Your fire makes you visible, smoke carries, hunters smell it." The woman's eyes flicked to the fire defensively, then back. "We needed heat." Zephyra stepped closer by one careful pace. "You want heat," she said. "You bury coals, no flame." The man swallowed. "Hunters," he murmured, as if the word itself was a wound. "They near?" Zephyra's gaze slid to the boy lying down. His breathing was shallow. "Fever." "They're always near," she said. "That's why you don't act like they're far." The woman's jaw worked. Pride and fear wrestled in her face. Finally, she nodded once, short. "Name," she said. "Zephyra." The woman hesitated, then answered. "Anaya," she said. "This is Jed." She jerked her chin toward the man. "And that's Micah. He's burning up." Zephyra crouched near Micah without touching him. She studied his eyes, glassy, unfocused. "How long he been like this?" 2 days, Jed said quietly. "He won't eat." Ruth stepped forward just enough that Zephyra could hear her. "We got bark," Ruth whispered. "The bitter kind. It helps sometimes." Zephyra nodded. She looked back at Anaya. "You got water?" Anaya pointed with the stick. "Stream down that way, but we didn't want to move him." Zephyra's mind worked quickly. They couldn't leave Micah. If they stayed here, hunters would find them. If they moved him too hard, he might not survive. Survival wasn't just running, it was choosing the least deadly option. Put it out, Zephyra told Anaya firm. Now. Anaya bristled. Who made you boss? Zephyra didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Nobody, she said. But I'm alive, and the swamp didn't take me, and hunters didn't either. So if you want to keep that boy breathing, you listen. For a moment, Anaya looked like she might swing the stick. Then she looked at Micah's damp forehead, at his trembling hands, and her anger collapsed into fear. She grabbed dirt and pressed it over the flames. Ruth joined in, quick and practiced, scattering leaves and damp moss until the light vanished. The hollow darkened. Without fire, the night seemed to grow teeth, but it also grew safer. Zephyra motioned for them to gather their things. Anaya's bundle was small. Jed had a rag sack. Micah had nothing but his own thin body. They moved. Zephyra set the pace, slow enough out to jolt Micah too much, fast enough to keep distance from any trail. Eli and Jed took turns carrying Micah between them, his arms draped over their shoulders. Micah moaned once, then fell into a heavy, fevered silence. They traveled along the stream's edge, stepping in water for stretches to confuse scent. Zephyra watched the wind. She watched the trees. She watched Anaya's eyes, because fear could make someone do foolish things, and foolishness could kill them all. After an hour, Zephyra found a place she liked better, a narrow ridge between two low ravines, thick with bramble and young cedar. It was not comfortable. Comfort was not the point. It was hard to approach quietly and hard to see into from a distance. The ground was dry enough, the wind shifted scent away, and the ravines would catch sound. Here, Zephyra whispered. They lowered Micah onto a bed of needles Ruth quickly arranged. Mara knelt beside him, her face worried. She looked at Zephyra like she wanted to ask a question but didn't know if she was allowed. Zephyra crouched and peeled a strip of bitter bark Ruth offered. She wet it in her mouth and pressed it gently against Micah's lips. Chew, she murmured, just a little. Micah's eyes fluttered. He tried to turn away, but Zephyra steadied his jaw with a careful hand, firm, not cruel. Chew, she repeated, stay with us. Slowly Micah's mouth moved. He swallowed. His breathing eased a fraction, not cured but less frantic. Anaya watched, arms crossed tight over her chest. In the darkness her confidence looked thinner. You done this before? She asked, voice smaller now. Zephyra shook her head once. I watched, she said. Watching is how you live. They settled again into the night, but the group had changed. 7 now. 7 meant more heat, more breath, more chance of noise. Zephyra adjusted their spacing. She assigned positions without debate. Ruth was to watch the ravine side. Eli and Jed rotated carry duty and watch duty. Mara stayed near Micah. Anaya watched the ridge edge, her sharp eyes now used for something more useful than pride. Just before dawn, Zephyra taught them something new. She plucked a small twig and broke it twice, soft, quick. She made a low bird call, not one any real bird made, but close enough to pass as nature if overheard. That means move, she whispered. She made another call, higher. That means freeze, a third, a soft clicking of tongue. That means danger, human. Eli frowned. We ain't birds. Zephyra's eyes stayed on the dark. Then be stones, she said, but stones don't warn each other. They practiced quietly, Ruth first, then Eli, then Jed, then Anaya. Mara struggled at first, her throat tightening, but after a few tries she produced a decent imitation. Micah couldn't practice. He lay sweating, eyes half open, as if listening from far away. When the sky lightened, Zephyra led them out before full dawn. She wanted the night's cover for as long as possible. They moved in staggered line, each person watching the one ahead but not close enough to be one cluster. She made them pause at every change in terrain. She made them listen to wind before crossing open patches. By midday, Micah's fever eased a little. He whispered once, hoarse, "Water." Mara nearly cried from relief. She brought water carefully, letting him sip. His hands trembled. He looked at Zephyra with unfocused eyes. "You, the swamp," he whispered. As if the words were myth. Zephyra nodded. "Yes." Micah's lips twitched faintly. They said, "Nobody." "People say many things," Zephyra replied. "People say things to keep themselves afraid." They traveled for days like that, moving, hiding, learning. Each day brought someone new. The first was a man who nearly killed Eli out of panic. He sprang from brush with a sharpened stake, eyes wild, yelling half words. Zephyra reacted instantly, not with anger but with speed. She made the danger call. Ruth froze. Mara pulled Micah back. Anaya lifted her stick. Eli stepped forward, insulted. Zephyra caught the man's wrist and twisted, not breaking but forcing the stake downward. "Quiet," she hissed, face close. "You want to live, you stop." The man's breath came ragged. He looked at Zephyra's eyes, at the scars, at the calm inside her violence, and his own panic faltered. He swallowed hard and nodded. His name was Isaiah. He had been out 5 days, alone, eating bark and insects. His mind was frayed, but his hands were strong. Strong hands mattered. The second was a pair of sisters who had been hiding near a creek, terrified of everything, even the wind. They saw Mara first and nearly ran. Mara, remembering her own panic, whispered softly to them from a distance, showing her empty hands, showing her thinness as proof she was not a trap. Zephyra watched Mara do it and felt something unfamiliar, pride. Not the proud feeling men used like a weapon, but the quiet satisfaction of seeing fear turned into skill. The sisters joined. Their names were Nella and June. They knew herbs Ruth didn't. They knew how to find edible roots. They knew how to tie knots that held under strain. With each new person the group grew, and so did the danger. Zephyra kept tightening the rules. No fires above a buried coal. No sleeping in the same place twice. No leaving scraps. No crying loud. No shouting even in fear. If someone needed to speak, they whispered in a single ear. If someone panicked, 2 people held them firm until their breath slowed. Zephyra did not shame panic. Shame made people hide their fear until it burst in the worst moment. But she punished noise. On the 7th night after they found Anaya, Isaiah began to argue with Eli, whispering at first, then louder, frustration rising. They were hungry. They were tired. Micah was better, but still weak. The forest felt endless. "I'm telling you," Isaiah hissed, voice climbing, "this is foolish. We going in circles." Eli snapped back louder than he meant to. "Then you lead, since you know everything." Zephyra rose like a shadow, crossing the space between them in 2 steps. She slapped Isaiah hard across the mouth, not to humiliate him, but to stop the sound. The slap echoed in the tight hollow like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Isaiah stared at her, stunned, hand lifting to his lip. Zephyra leaned in, voice so low it was almost nothing. "You shout," she whispered. "You kill children. You kill Micah. You kill yourself. Your pride isn't worth our blood." Isaiah's eyes flicked around at the others. Mara trembling, Ruth staring hard, Micah watching weakly, June biting her lip. He swallowed, his shoulders sagged, shame and fear mixing. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Zephyra nodded once. "Good," she said. "Now learn." After that, when someone felt anger rise, they stepped away. They clenched their fists, in silence. They buried their frustration in movement. Zephyra had not erased their humanity. She had shaped it into something that could survive, and slowly something changed. They stopped being a collection of runaways. They became a thing with edges and rules, a thing that could move like water through the land. One evening, as they crouched in a thicket near a bend in the river, Zephyra saw a figure far off on the opposite bank. One person, moving cautiously, looking over their shoulder. The person stopped, bent down, and placed something on a rock, a small pile of stones, stacked in a deliberate pattern. Zephyra's breath caught, not random, not nature. A signal. She stared across the water, heart pounding, and felt a door crack open in her mind. If others were leaving signals, then there were others beyond her group, people who had been out longer, people who had created their own language of survival. Ruth came beside her silently. "You see that?" Ruth whispered. Zephyra nodded. "Yes." "Who do you think?" Ruth began. Zephyra lifted a hand. "Quiet," she whispered. "Watch." The figure across the river vanished into trees, leaving the stone stack behind like a quiet invitation or a warning. Zephyra stood very still for a long time, staring at the stones. Her group huddled behind her, waiting. Eli's impatience flickered, but he didn't speak. Mara's eyes were wide, hopeful and afraid at the same time. Zephyra finally turned back to them. "There are more," she said softly. Anaya's eyebrows lifted. "More run?" "More who learned to live out here." Isaiah's voice was barely audible. "And what that mean for us?" Zephyra looked at each face. Ruth, steady and tired. Eli, stubborn but learning. Mara, brave in her own fragile way. Micah, recovering, eyes bright with the kind of gratitude that made a person dangerous to themselves. Anaya, sharp and proud. Jed, quiet and watchful. Nella and June, clinging to each other, Isaiah, restless but useful. Then she spoke the thought that had been growing since the swamp, since the first time she realized survival could be more than running. "It means we stop moving like lost people," she said. "We start moving like we belong." They stared at her, not fully understanding. Zephyra pointed toward the river bend, toward the stone stack, toward the deeper woods beyond. "We find where they are," she said. "We learn what they know, and if there is a place to hide that lasts longer than a night, we build it." Eli's mouth opened and closed. Fear rose in him. Fear of staying, fear of being found, fear of hope. "Build?" he whispered. Zephyra nodded. "A place," she said, "hidden, defended, with rules, with signals, with food, with water, a place where runaways don't have to wander until they die." Mara's eyes filled with tears she didn't wipe away. Ruth's hand trembled slightly, then steadied. Anaya's voice came out rough. "They'll hunt us harder." Zephyra's gaze was steady. "They already hunt," she said. "At least this way we choose the ground." The river murmured beside them, indifferent to human plans. The forest swayed overhead, old and patient. Zephyra bent down, picked up a stone and placed it in her palm like a promise, and for the first time since she slipped through the quarter's wall, the direction she felt was not only away, it was toward something. The stone stack across the river waited like a quiet question. Zephyra did not rush toward it. She made them watch the opposite bank until the light began to fade, until every shifting shadow could be understood as wind or bird or nothing at all. Only then did she signal the group to move back into cover. They traveled upstream through thick brush, keeping the river in sight but never walking openly along it. Water was a guide, but it was also a mirror. Anyone watching from the far side could track movement along the bank. Zephyra made them cross and recross small tributaries, step on stones, wade through shallow stretches, and climb ridges that hurt their legs but broke patterns. Micah was still weak. Eli and Jed carried him in turns, though Micah insisted on walking whenever he could, as if stubbornness might make him whole. Mara stayed close enough to catch him if he stumbled. Ruth and the sisters, Nella and June, searched constantly for anything edible, roots, nuts, berries, bringing their finds silently to Zephyra's palm for quick judgment. Zephyra had become the place decisions landed, whether she wanted that weight or not. Near nightfall they came to a bend where the river widened and slowed. The water here was darker, moving like old oil. On the opposite bank, the trees stood thicker than anywhere else, their trunks braided with vines. A low mist hovered above the surface. It was the kind of place a person could vanish, and that was exactly what frightened Zephyra. She stopped them in a shallow ravine, hidden from the river's edge by a wall of shrubs. She raised her fist, halt, and waited, listening. The forest was loud with its own life. Frogs croaked, birds called, the river made its steady hush. But under it all, Zephyra heard something else, faint, deliberate movement. Not a deer, not wind. She crouched, plucked a small pebble, and tossed it lightly toward the brush on their left. Nothing. She tossed another, farther. A soft click answered from somewhere ahead, subtle, controlled, as if made by a human tongue against teeth. Zephyra's breath tightened. She glanced back. Ruth's eyes widened. Eli tensed. Anaya's hand tightened on her stick. Mara clutched Micah's sleeve. Zephyra lifted her hand and made the smallest danger sign, human, then held it still, palm down, steady. It was not a warning to run. It was a warning to obey. She rose slowly and stepped out from the ravine into a narrow strip of open ground, letting the leaves crunch softly under her feet on purpose. She wanted whoever watched to know she was aware. Surprises got people killed. "I saw your stones," Zephyra said, voice low. Silence answered, long enough that doubt tried to crawl into the edges of her mind. Then a voice came from the trees, not loud, not fearful, measured. "Only a fool follows stones without knowing who set them." Zephyra kept her face calm. "Only a fool sets stones where no one sees them," she replied. A pause. Then movement. Careful, controlled. A figure stepped out from behind a thick trunk, a man with skin dark as river mud and eyes that missed nothing. He was tall but thin, his frame built from hunger and endurance. A hat sat low on his head, but it was not the kind plantations issued. It looked like something taken. His hands were empty, but Zephyra noticed the knife at his belt and the way his weight rested on the balls of his feet, like someone ready to disappear. Behind him, a second figure appeared, then a third, 2 women, both quiet, both watching from different angles as if trained. Zephyra realized then that she was standing in the center of a net. Not a hostile one yet, but a net all the same. The man studied her. His gaze flicked to the whip scars on her back and returned to her eyes. "Name," he said, "Zephyra." His eyebrows rose slightly like he'd expected something else. "That's a rare name." "It's mine," she said, same as before, because she would not let her name be negotiated. The man nodded once. "I'm Solomon," he said. He gestured subtly. "That's Cora. That's Maybe." Cora was broad-shouldered, her hair wrapped tight, her jaw set like stone. Maybe was smaller, her eyes sharp and wary, a scar cutting down one cheek. Both women watched Zephyra like they were reading her. "How many you got?" Solomon asked. Zephyra didn't look back. She didn't want to reveal the ravine's exact point. "Enough," she said. "We're hungry. We're hunted. We want to live." Solomon's mouth twitched. "Everybody wants to live," he said. "Not everybody knows how." Zephyra held his gaze. "You set stones. That means you expect someone to come." Solomon tilted his head. "Or I expect hunters to waste time chasing ghosts." Zephyra didn't blink. "Hunters don't stack stones," she said. "Not like that." Cora stepped forward a fraction, her voice like rough cloth. "She's right," she said. "We don't leave signs for hunters. We leave signs for the ones who can read." Maybe's eyes stayed on Zephyra's hands. "Could still be bait," she murmured. Solomon raised a hand slightly, enough to quiet them. Then he looked at Zephyra again. "Where you come from?" "River Plantation," Zephyra said. 3 nights through swamp." That made Maybe's mouth tighten. Cora's eyes narrowed in something like respect. Solomon exhaled slowly, as if considering a door he hadn't intended to open. "You got courage," he said, "or you got madness." Zephyra didn't smile. "I got decision." A faint sound came from the ravine, Micah coughing weakly. Zephyra's shoulders went rigid before she could stop it. Cora's head snapped toward the sound. Maybe's hand moved toward her belt. Zephyra lifted her hand sharply, freeze toward the ravine. The cough died into silence. Solomon's gaze sharp. "You got a sick one," he said. "Yes," Zephyra admitted. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned his head slightly. "Bring them," he said. Maybe's voice snapped. "Sol." He cut her off with a look. "Bring them," he repeated. "But careful. If she's lying, I'll know before her mouth finishes." Zephyra held her posture steady, though her heart hammered. She turned and made the move call. 2 soft clicks. Ruth guided the group out one by one, keeping spacing, no rushing, no talking. Eli's eyes were hard, suspicious. Anaya's chin was lifted like she refused to look weak. Mara stayed close to Micah, who leaned on Jed's shoulder. Solomon watched them all appear like a man counting in silence. His eyes paused on the sisters, on Isaiah, on Micah's sweat-slick face, and then returned to Zephyra. "He said been moving anyway," Zephyra replied. Solomon nodded once, as if that answered more than the words. "Follow," he said. He did not lead them straight into the thickest trees. He took them sideways along the bank first, then up a narrow, muddy incline, then into brush so dense Zephyra would have thought it impassable. But Solomon moved through it like he had cut it with his own hands. Cora and Maybe moved around them, not in front, not behind, beside, watching angles. It was clear they were being guided, but also evaluated. One wrong move and the forest would swallow Solomon's people before Zephyra could blink. They walked for nearly an hour in deepening dusk until the air changed. It grew warmer, heavier with the smell of damp earth and smoke. Old smoke, not fresh. The ground under their feet became firmer, packed, as if many feet had walked it before.
Zephyra's eyes narrowed. Trails meant risk. Trails also meant organization.
And then they came to the first boundary. It wasn't a fence. It wasn't a wall. It was the forest itself shaped into a barrier, fallen logs arranged like natural collapse, thorn bushes woven deliberately into gaps, vines trained across openings. From a distance it looked like nothing but thick undergrowth. Up close, it was a gate. Solomon stopped and made a low call, 3 notes like a bird that didn't exist. Silence answered, then the same call returned from within. A section of tangled vine shifted. A face appeared between leaves, young, watching, wary. The boy's eyes flicked over Zephyra's group and then to Solomon. "Open," Solomon said. The barrier parted just enough for bodies to slip through single file. As Zephyra stepped into the space beyond, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel since the quarters, the sensation of being inside a place claimed by people like her. Not owned, claimed. The settlement was hidden under the canopy like a secret held in the throat. Low shelters made from branches, mud, and salvaged boards sat in clusters. Some were half dug into the ground to keep their shape low. Smoke rose in thin, carefully vented threads from pits rather than open fires. A small garden patch lay under a gap in the trees where light could reach, greens and something that looked like corn stalks not yet tall. Water barrels sat beneath leaves arranged to catch rain. Ropes were strung between trees at odd heights, trip lines, Zephyra realized, meant to alert or to trip anyone who moved too quickly. People were everywhere, but not crowded. A woman stirring a pot in a covered pit, a man sharpening a blade with slow strokes, children moving silently like they'd been taught to treat sound as a currency. Zephyra counted without meaning to. 15, 20, more hidden in shadow. They were thin but not broken. They moved like people who knew they belonged to the woods. Ruth's breath caught. Mara's eyes widened, tears gathering. Eli stared openly, disbelief cracking his stubborn face. Anaya's posture wavered, as if she didn't know whether to fight or kneel. Micah whispered something hoarse, people, and Mara pressed her hand to his shoulder as if to keep him from collapsing. Solomon turned to Zephyra. "We call it Briar Hollow," he said quietly. "Not because it's pretty, because it bites." Zephyra nodded once. "How long?" Solomon's gaze drifted over the shelters as if he could see years in their shapes. "Long enough to learn what works," he said. "Long enough to bury the ones who didn't." Maybe stepped forward, eyes narrow. "Rules," she said bluntly. "You follow, you live. You break, you leave, or worse." Zephyra met her gaze. "We already live by rules," she said. "We had to." Cora's mouth twitched faintly, approval hidden. "Then you'll fit," Cora said, "if you don't bring trouble." Trouble. The word was heavy. Trouble was what the masters called any breath that didn't sound obedient. Zephyra understood what Cora truly meant. "If you bring hunters to our door, you kill us all." "I don't bring trouble," Zephyra said. "I bring people." Solomon studied her again, longer this time. Then he gestured toward a shelter near the edge, low, half-hidden. "You stay there," he said, "until we decide." Eli bristled. "Decide what?" Maybe's eyes flashed. "Decide if you're worth the risk." Zephyra lifted her hand slightly, stopping Eli before he could make noise. She turned to Solomon. "Micah needs water and shade," she said. Solomon nodded toward a woman near a covered pit. "Cora," he said, and Cora motioned sharply. A young girl no older than 12 slipped forward with a gourd of water and a cloth. Mara took it, whispering thanks without sound. The girl nodded once, expression serious as an adult's. She watched Micah's face with practiced eyes, then gestured toward a deeper shade patch. Zephyra watched the child and felt something twist inside her, sorrow, anger, and something like hope all tangled. Children were children here, but they were also sentries. They had been shaped by the same danger. They settled into the assigned shelter. It smelled of damp earth and dried leaves. It wasn't comfortable, but it was shelter. Zephyra sat near the entrance where she could see out. Ruth sat beside her, silent. Eli paced in a tight circle like a caged animal. Anaya leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes hard. Isaiah sat with his back to a post, jaw clenched, trying to understand a world where escape didn't end in immediate death. Night fell fully. In Briar Hollow it fell without ceremony. No lanterns flared, no fires glowed. People moved quietly, like shadows obeying rules older than fear. Later, Solomon returned with 2 others, an older man with graying hair and a woman with a deep scar across her forearm. The older man's eyes were sharp and tired. "This is Aunt Millie," Solomon said, nodding to the woman, "and this is Ezra." Millie's gaze moved over Zephyra's group like a hand checking for wounds. Ezra's eyes lingered on Eli, then on Anaya, then on Zephyra. "You led them," Ezra said. It wasn't a question. Zephyra didn't deny it. "I moved first," she said. Ezra's lips tightened. "Moving first gets people killed," he said. "It also gets them out," Zephyra replied. Silence stretched. Outside somewhere, a child coughed and was quickly hushed. The hush was not cruel. It was automatic. Millie crouched near Micah without fear and placed the back of her hand against his forehead. "Fever's breaking," she murmured. "He'll live if he eats." Mara exhaled shakily, relief making her shoulders sag. Micah's eyes fluttered. He swallowed hard. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely there. Millie looked at him kindly, but firm. "Save your breath," she said. "You'll need it." Ezra straightened and looked at Zephyra again. "Why you come?" he asked. "Not why you run. Why you come here?" Zephyra held his gaze. "We saw your stones," she said, and I'm tired of wandering until the woods decide. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Everybody tired, he said. Zephyra's voice stayed calm. I want something that lasts longer than a night, she said. A place where Run can come and not die alone. Solomon's eyebrows lifted slightly. Millie's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened a fraction. Ezra stared at Zephyra as if measuring the weight of her words. People talk like that, Ezra said slowly. Then hunters find them and everyone pays. Zephyra nodded once. That's why it can't be only talk, she said. It has to be built right. Ezra's mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh but couldn't afford it. You think you can build better than we did? He asked, challenge in the question. Zephyra shook her head. I think I can learn, she said, and I think I can help you hold it. Ezra's eyes moved to her scars again, then to the group behind her, faces thin with hunger but alive. You got skills? He asked. Ruth spoke before Zephyra could. Her eyes, Ruth said quietly. She sees what we miss. Eli looked offended at first, then closed his mouth. He knew Ruth was right. Anaya lifted her chin. I'm not dead weight, she said. I can hunt small game. I can fight. Isaiah's voice was rough. I can build, he said. I used to fix sheds and fences. I know wood. June and Nella murmured about herbs and knots. Jed said nothing but held Ezra's gaze steady. Ezra listened without expression. Then he turned to Solomon and Millie. Keep them inside the boundary, Ezra said. No wandering alone. They learn our signals. They work. We watch. Solomon nodded. Millie nodded. Ezra looked at Zephyra one last time. If you bring hunters here, he said, I won't wait for them. I'll cut the tie myself. Zephyra's throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. I understand, she said. Ezra left without another word. When Solomon and Millie followed, the shelter felt suddenly smaller, heavy with the truth of the place. This was not freedom. This was a fragile war fought in quiet. Outside, a soft clicking call sounded, one of their signals. A child answered from another direction. The settlement breathed in a disciplined rhythm. Ruth leaned toward Zephyra, voice barely air. We found it, she whispered. Zephyra stared out into the dark, watching shadow shapes move between shelters. We found a beginning, she corrected, in the days that followed. Zephyra learned Briar Hollow's structure the way she learned everything, by watching first, then moving. The community survived because it treated itself like a living thing that had to be protected. There were watchers always, children trained to sit still for hours, adults who rotated posts, trip lines set in patterns only insiders knew. There were pathways that looked natural but were deliberately curved to avoid leaving obvious trails. There were decoy shelters farther out, deliberately messy, meant to lure hunters toward empty spaces. There were false fire pits built and abandoned to suggest movement in the wrong direction. It was a world of tricks and patience. Food was gathered in careful ways. They foraged widely, never stripping one area bare. They set snares and checked them silently. They kept a small garden patch hidden under canopy gaps, rotating plantings. Water was collected in barrels and filtered through cloth and sand. Everything was done with an eye toward not being seen. Zephyra joined work immediately. She helped dig a new pit for a covered cooking fire designed to vent smoke through a long, low channel under damp soil. Isaiah worked beside her, hands skilled and eager. Ruth learned the community's herb stores and added her own knowledge, speaking with Millie. The sisters helped weave vine screens. Jed and Eli helped strengthen the thorn barrier, learning the hidden gates pattern. Anaya, still proud, tested boundaries, asking too many sharp questions, stepping too close to the perimeter. Maybe watched her like a hawk. Once, when Anaya tried to slip out alone to prove herself, Maybe caught her by the arm and slammed her into a tree with silent fury. "You want to die," Maybe hissed. "Do it away from us." Anaya's eyes flashed with humiliation, but she didn't. "Try again." "Not that weak." Micah improved slowly. He began to sit up. He began to eat. Children brought him water and watched him with the curious solemnity of those who had seen too much death too young. Mara stayed near him anyway, as if her presence might keep his lungs working. One evening, as Zephyra returned from reinforcing a decoy trail, Solomon approached her at the edge of the garden patch. He sat on a log, rubbing dirt from his hands. "You don't rest," Solomon said quietly. Zephyra glanced at him. "Rest is for people who aren't hunted," she replied. Solomon's mouth twitched. "We rest," he said, "or we go mad." Zephyra didn't answer right away. She watched a child moving between trees, placing small stones at the base of trunks in patterns. She watched the way adults pretended not to look but always looked. "Maybe mad is what keeps us alive," she said. Solomon stared at her for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "Ezra don't like new leaders," he said. Zephyra met his gaze. "I'm not trying to be liked," she said. Solomon exhaled. "You talk like someone who wants more than hiding." Zephyra looked toward the boundary, toward the unseen world beyond the trees. "Hiding is a beginning," she said, "not an end." Solomon studied her, then nodded slowly. "If you want more," he murmured, "you better learn how to keep what you build from being found." Zephyra's eyes sharpened. "Teach me," she said. Solomon's gaze lingered on her face, weighing risk against need. Then he motioned with his chin toward the deeper part of the settlement where the light never reached easily. "Come tomorrow," he said, "before dawn. I'll show you how Briar Hollow stays invisible." Zephyra nodded once, feeling the decision lock into her bones. That night, lying on the packed earth of the shelter, listening to the settlement's careful breathing, Zephyra felt the shape of the future grow clearer. This place was not just a hiding spot, it was a blueprint, and if it could be built once, it could be built stronger, not just to survive, to last.
Before dawn, Briar Hollow looked like a rumor.
The shelters flattened into the earth and the shadows. The thorn gate became nothing but a snarl of undergrowth, and the people became shapes that moved only when necessary. Zephyra followed Solomon along a narrow path that didn't look like a path at all, just a sequence of places where leaves lay differently, where moss was rubbed thin on a stone, where a branch had been trained to bend without breaking. "Step where I step," Solomon whispered without turning. Zephyra did. She kept her feet light and her eyes wider than her fear. Her back still ached, but pain had become background, like insects buzzing. They moved past a stand of cedars and into a darker section of forest where the air stayed cool even in summer. Solomon stopped beside a tree whose trunk had been hollowed by age. Inside the hollow, Zephyra saw a coil of vine rope, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and a cluster of bones. Animal, cleaned, arranged deliberately. "What is this?" she whispered. "Signal cache," Solomon said. "If we scatter, if we run, we leave these in places only we know. Food, cord, flint. We don't carry everything. Carrying makes you slow." He touched the bones. "And this tells us which way the others went. Bones facing north means move north. Facing east means don't go east. Facing down means danger." Zephyra stared at the arrangement, memorizing it, feeling the logic settle into her mind. Every detail was a response to a world designed to crush you. Briar Hollow survived by becoming more than people. It became a system. Solomon led her farther, and she began to see the settlement's deeper defenses, false trails made by dragging sacks of leaves, decoy fire pits lined with ash and nothing else, clusters of broken twigs placed to mimic careless movement in the wrong direction. There were places where the brush had been thinned just enough to see the bounder, without stepping into it. There were places where you could hide and watch the watchers. "Ezra calls it the skin," Solomon murmured. "The first layer. Hunters touch that skin and think they've found something. They follow the wrong scent. They chase the wrong shape." "And the second layer?" Zephyra whispered. Solomon glanced at her. "The second layer is us moving before they know we moved," he said. They returned before full light, slipping through the thorn gate one at a time. The settlement stirred. Quiet, footsteps, murmured signals, the soft scrape of tools. Millie was already awake, her hands busy sorting herbs in a cloth-lined basket. Mabie stood near the boundary with her eyes fixed outward, listening like a blade held to the air. Zephyra had just crouched near the covered cooking pit to help Ruth with water filtration when the first warning came. It wasn't a shout, it was a sound. Briar Hollow had trained itself to obey, 3 rapid clicks, then a long pause, then 1 click. Danger, human, near. The entire settlement tightened. Children vanished into shelters. Tools stopped moving. Bodies went low and still. Even the birds seemed to hush, as if the forest itself recognized the change. Zephyra's chest went cold. Mabie appeared between 2 trees, moving fast but controlled. She reached Ezra's shelter and made the signal again, closer, sharper. Ezra stepped out, older, lean, eyes hard, and instantly the atmosphere shifted. Not calmer, but focused. He lifted 2 fingers, pointed outward, and Solomon and 2 others melted into the trees like smoke. Zephyra looked for Ruth. Ruth had already pulled Mara and Micah deeper into shade, her hand on Mara's shoulder like an anchor. Eli and Jed crouched behind a low log near the decoy trail line, eyes narrowed. Isaiah gripped a digging tool as if it were a weapon and tried not to breathe too loud. Anaya, face tight, watched maybe for cues she didn't want to admit she needed. Ezra's gaze swept the settlement once and landed on Zephyra. "You," he whispered, motioning with 2 fingers. "Come." Zephyra rose and followed him toward a narrow watching notch between thick shrubs. From there she could see the outer skin of Briar Hollow, the false trail area, the decoy shelter, the shallow dip where hunters sometimes tested ground. The forest beyond was a smear of green and shadow. At first she saw nothing, then she saw movement, a flicker of brown and dull gray between trees, a shape that paused, crouched, scanned, another shape behind it, men, boots, not plantation boots, heavier. Designed for distance, Zephyra's throat tightened. Hunters, they were not moving like overseers who expected obedience. They moved like men who expected resistance. One held a rifle low, another carried a length of rope, a third had a dog on a short lead. The dog's nose worked the air, restless, confused by the damp forest and the decoy scents. "They're inside the skin," Zephyra whispered. Ezra didn't answer. His face did not change. Only his eyes sharpened, and Zephyra realized he'd been waiting for this moment for years, every day, every night. Briar Hollow existed on a knife edge, and this was the blade pressing harder. The hunters paused at the decoy fire pit. One crouched and touched ash. He rubbed it between his fingers, then lifted it to his nose. His expression tightened, uncertain. He gestured, and the others spread out in a loose semicircle. The dog pulled toward the decoy trail. It was working. The skin was doing its job, but then one of the men, a tall one with a scar down his neck, stopped suddenly. He turned his head, listening, not to the ground, but to the forest. He lifted a hand to halt the others. Zephyra felt something shift in her gut. That man was not following smell. He was reading silence. Scarneck took a step away from the decoy trail, moving toward a patch of brush that was too still. He knelt, touched the ground, and stared at a crushed leaf. Ezra's jaw tightened. "Who's that?" Zephyra whispered. Ezra's voice was like stone. "That's Briggs," he said. "He hunts people, not tracks." Zephyra watched Briggs rise and scan slowly, his eyes moving with the patience of someone who enjoyed the hunt. He looked toward the tree line, toward the deeper part where Briar Hollow hid itself. He smiled faintly. Zephyra's blood ran colder. Briggs lifted 2 fingers and whistled softly, not a loud call, but enough. The dog's ears perked. The man with the leash adjusted his grip. The semicircle tightened. The skin was cracking. Ezra made a signal behind them, 2 clicks and a low tongue tap. "Move without noise. Scatter, watchers. Prepare." Zephyra turned and saw Solomon appear at Ezra's shoulder, eyes grim. Cora and Maybe moved with silent urgency, guiding people in small groups deeper into the settlement's second layer. Not a full evacuation. Yet. A tightening, a readiness. Micah tried to stand, stubborn even now. Mara grabbed his arm and held him down, whispering fiercely into his ear. Ruth's eyes were wide but steady. A child slipped past Zephyra carrying a bundle of cloth. One of the caches being moved, Zephyra realized. The settlement was already shifting shape. Briggs took another step forward, and then the forest betrayed them, not with sound but with accident. A small branch snapped somewhere off to the right, not loud, but in a moment this tense, it might as well have been a bell. Zephyra's head whipped toward it. So did Briggs's. The snap had come from near the edge where Anaya had been crouched. Zephyra saw Anaya's face tighten in horror. She hadn't meant it. She'd simply shifted her weight wrong. Briggs's eyes narrowed, and he angled toward the sound. Ezra's hand clenched on the shrub. Maybe's gaze hardened. She looked at Ezra once, and Zephyra saw an entire argument pass between them without words. Do we let them come closer to preserve silence, or do we break silence now to stop him? Ezra made the decision with a single motion. He lifted his hand and made the danger call, fast, sharp, not to warn the hunters, to warn Briar Hollow. Then he leaned toward Zephyra and whispered, "You want to help us hold it? Now's your chance." Zephyra didn't hesitate. "Tell me what," she whispered back. Ezra's eyes stayed locked on Briggs. "We don't fight fair," he said. "We fight hidden. You see that ravine line? If they cross it, they'll be too close to pull back without blood." Zephyra followed his gaze. The ravine line marked the boundary between skin and heart. Briggs was heading straight for it. "We need them to turn," Ezra said. "Not run, turn, think they're wrong." Zephyra's mind snapped into motion. Turn them, misdirect, use their certainty against them. She looked for the dog. The dog was the most honest thing among them, nose pulling where the scent lay. She remembered the caches, the bones, the tallow, the tricks. We can make scent behind them, Zephyra whispered. Make them believe we moved away from here. Solomon's eyes flicked to her. How? He whispered. Zephyra scanned the ground near them. Mud, leaf rot, the stream path not far, and, near the base of a tree, a small cloth bundle tucked under roots. Cash. Zephyra slid toward it without standing, opened it with careful fingers, and found a strip of dried meat, a small rag soaked in something pungent, animal fat mixed with herbs, and a coil of vine cord. She looked at Ezra. Give me one runner, she whispered. Fast, light. Mara was too young and too attached to Micah. Ruth would be careful but slower. Eli would stomp. Anaya was reckless, but she was fast. Zephyra's eyes met Anaya's. Anaya flinched, still ashamed of the snapped branch, but Zephyra made the move signal and pointed 2 fingers at her. Come. Anaya crawled over, face tight. What? She hissed, barely audible. You want to fix your mistake? Zephyra whispered. Run like wind and don't make a sound until I tell you. Anaya's jaw clenched. She nodded. Zephyra pressed the pungent rag into Anaya's hand and tied the vine cord around it quickly. When I signal, Zephyra whispered, you go wide, circle behind them and drag this along the ground back toward the river. Make it look like people fled toward water. Then you hide and wait. Anaya's eyes narrowed. That'll work? It has to, Zephyra said. Ezra watched Zephyra for a beat, measuring trust in a heartbeat, and then gave a small sharp click. Go. Anaya vanished. Now it was a race between the hunter's patience and Briar Hollow's deception. Briggs continued forward, slow, confident. The other men followed in a loose line, stepping carefully. The dog pulled, then hesitated, confused by overlapping scents. The handler cursed under his breath and tugged the leash. Zephyra held her breath, listening for Anaya's movement, praying without praying that she would move with the silence Zephyra demanded. Minutes stretched thin. Then, from far behind the hunters, a faint disturbance, leaves shifting, soft scraping, so subtle it might have been a rabbit. But the dog's nose snapped up. It turned, pulling toward the new scent trail. The handler's eyes widened. There, he whispered. Briggs paused. His head turned slowly. He watched the dog strain backward, his mouth tightened, suspicion rising, but the other men were not Briggs. They trusted the dog. They trusted the simple logic of pursuit. Their fear of losing prey pressed them into motion. One man hissed. They doubled back and started moving toward the river line. The semicircle broke. The group shifted direction. Briggs stared after them, his eyes narrowing. He looked once toward the ravine line, toward the heart of Briar Hollow, then back toward the dog's frantic pull. Zephyra could almost see the calculation in him. If he ignored the dog and went deeper, he might be right. Or he might be alone. Alone in a forest where people disappeared. Even a predator understood risk. Briggs spat into the dirt and followed his men, not convinced, but unwilling to be separated. Zephyra's lungs unclenched. Ezra's expression didn't soften, but his eyes flicked to Zephyra, an acknowledgement as sharp as a nod. They watched the hunters retreat toward the river, following Anaya's dragged scent line. The dog pulled them along like a certainty they didn't question. But danger didn't vanish just because you won one exchange. Men like Briggs did not like being made foolish. As the hunters moved away, Ezra made the move call again, short, urgent. The settlement shifted instantly. People relocated deeper, caches were moved, the thorn gate was reinforced, decoy trails were refreshed to look older, more convincing. The entire community tightened like a fist. Zephyra slipped back toward Mara and Micah. Mara's eyes were huge. Did we? Mara began. Not yet, Zephyra whispered. We only breathed. Micah's voice was weak but steady. They here? He rasped. Zephyra nodded once. Close, she said, but not inside. Ruth pressed her hand briefly against Zephyra's wrist. That was you, Ruth whispered. That turn, you did that. Zephyra didn't answer. She didn't want credit. Credit made people think one person mattered more than the system. System survived. Heroes got killed, an hour passed. Then, too, the forest stayed tense, but no new danger call came. Birds began to move normally again. A child's soft humming started and was immediately hushed. Not scolded, just corrected. Life resumed in careful increments. Then Anaya returned. She appeared at the edge of the settlement like a ghost, mud-streaked, eyes bright with adrenaline. Maybe seized her by the shoulder and shoved her against a tree, knife flashing to her throat in a heartbeat. Where were you? Maybe hissed. Anaya's breath hitched. Working, she snapped back, then caught herself and lowered her voice. Zephyra sent me. Maby's eyes flicked toward Zephyra, confirmation demanded. Zephyra nodded once, Maby released Anna. Yeah, but her gaze stayed hard. You make noise again, she whispered. I won't wait for orders. Anaya swallowed, nodding, her pride bruised but alive. Ezra called a quiet gathering near the center, only adults, only those who understood what was at stake. Zephyra stood among them, feeling eyes on her now, different than before, not suspicion only, evaluation, respect edged with caution. Ezra's voice was low. Briggs is back in our skin, he said. That means someone talked, or someone followed longer than we thought. Either way, it means this place is known more than it should be. Cora's jaw tightened. We can move, she whispered. Scatter. Millie shook her head slowly. Moving kills the old, she murmured, and the small. Solomon's gaze was distant. And moving doesn't erase memory, he said. Men like Briggs remember the shape of trees. Silence fell, heavy. Ezra looked at Zephyra. You said hiding is a beginning, he murmured. What's next? Zephyra felt every heartbeat. This was a dangerous moment, not because of hunters alone, but because leadership was a flame that could burn a community if handled wrong. She chose her words like stepping stones. We tighten the skin, she said. We change it. If they've learned the old tricks, we make new ones. We stop leaving patterns even we enjoy. Maby nodded slightly, approval sharp. And we build deeper, Zephyra continued. If they can reach this edge, we need another edge, another hidden ring farther in, a second briar hollow inside the first. Ezra's eyes narrowed. More work. Yes, Zephyra said, but work is cheaper than chains. Solomon exhaled, slow. She's right, he said quietly. Briggs came close because he started reading our habits. We can't let habit become a trail. Ezra stared at Zephyra a long moment. Then he nodded once, grudging but real. We do it, he said. But understand this. Next time he may not turn. Next time blood may be the price. Zephyra met his gaze. Then we decide where blood falls, she said softly. Not them. That night, Briar Hollow did not celebrate surviving. It worked. They dug new covered pits for cooking farther from the central cluster. They moved the garden patch's visible edges beneath more canopy. They relocated sleeping shelters in small increments, making the layout less predictable. They reset trip lines and planted thorn cuttings in new patterns. They built a second hidden gate deeper in, one that even new arrivals wouldn't know about until needed. Zephyra worked until her hands trembled, until her back burned, until fatigue tried to blur her vision. Near midnight she found Ezra alone by a watching notch, staring outward as if his gaze could hold off the future. You did good today, Ezra said without turning. Zephyra remained still. Compliments were rare here. Rare meant important. I did what was needed, she replied. Ezra's mouth twitched. You got a way of making decisions fast, he said. That's dangerous. Zephyra's eyes stayed on the dark. So is being slow, she said. Ezra was silent for a moment, then spoke in a voice that sounded older than he looked. Briggs doesn't give up, he said. He'll come back. He'll bring more. He'll change dogs, change men, change ways. Zephyra nodded once. She could already feel it, like thunder before the storm. Ezra finally turned his head slightly, eyes catching her profile. You still want to build, he asked. Zephyra's throat tightened. She thought of Lissa, of the whip, of Mara's trembling hope, of the children here who had learned silence before laughter. She thought of the stone stack on the river, the invitation that had become a lifeline. Yes, she said, because running forever isn't living. Ezra looked back into the forest. Then start thinking bigger, he murmured, because when Briggs comes back he won't just be hunting bodies. Zephyra's gaze sharpened. What will he hunt? Ezra's voice dropped, almost nothing. He'll hunt the idea. A place like this can't exist in their minds, so they'll burn the woods to prove it. The words struck Zephyra like cold water. Burn the woods. She pictured flame racing through brush, smoke choking children, shelters turning to ash. She felt her pulse quicken, not with panic, but with a new, fierce clarity. If the enemy would burn the forest, then Briar Hollow could not rely on the forest alone. They would need roots. They would need decoys far beyond their boundary. They would need allies, signals, hidden stores, places to scatter that were already prepared. They would need to become not one settlement but many, connected, resilient, impossible to erase in a single strike. Zephyra looked into the dark and felt the future tilt. The hunters had come close today, too close, and now the war had changed shape. It was no longer only about escaping, it was about enduring. The next morning, Briar Hollow moved like a body that had felt a knife near its ribs. No one spoke above a whisper. Children were kept close, hands busy, eyes trained outward. The cooking pits were used only long enough to feed the smallest and the weakest, then covered again. Water barrels were shifted under thicker canopy. Paths that had been walked too often were abandoned and replaced with new, awkward routes that scraped skin and tore cloth. Better torn cloth than a clear trail. Zephyra didn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ezra's mouth forming the words again. Burn the woods. Fire didn't hunt like men. Fire didn't get bored. Fire didn't need dogs. It simply ate. So Zephyra began doing what she did best, turning fear into structure. She gathered Solomon, Maybe, Cora, and Ruth in the narrow space behind a thicket where sound died quickly. Eli hovered nearby, pretending he was only checking trip lines, but his ears were open. Anaya sat with her arms crossed, still angry at herself for the snapped branch, still hungry for redemption. "We build a third thing," Zephyra said, voice low. Maybe's eyes narrowed. "We already built a second ring," she replied. "Deeper gate, more lines." "Rings don't help if the whole forest burns," Zephyra said. Silence tightened. Even Maybe didn't snap back. Everyone had pictured it. Everyone had felt how helpless a hidden shelter would be against flame and smoke. Solomon exhaled slowly. "What third thing?" he asked. "A net," Zephyra said. "Not one place. Many small places. Caches that can feed us if we scatter, signals that can pull us back together after the fire passes, and noise, controlled noise." Cora's brow furrowed. "Noise brings hunters." "Noise also pulls hunters away," Zephyra replied. "If they're looking for a settlement, we stop looking like one. We start looking like 100 ghosts." Ruth's eyes brightened with understanding first. "Decoys," she whispered. "Yes," Zephyra said, "but not just pits and false trails, living decoys." Eli stepped closer, unable to hold back. "You mean people?" Zephyra met his gaze. "I mean small teams," she said. "Fast, quiet, trusted. They move, they leave signs, they vanish. They make Briggs chase wrong shadows until he forgets where the real heart is." Maybe's jaw tightened. "That gets people killed." "Briggs already gets people killed," Zephyra said. "I'm offering a way for him to waste time doing it." Solomon leaned forward slightly. "And if he stops chasing and burns anyway? Then we don't die in one place," Zephyra said. "We scatter along prepared routes. We meet at prepared points. We become something he can't erase with one match." Maybe stared at Zephyra for a long moment, then looked away as if irritated by how much sense it made. Ezra arrived quietly, as if the forest had carried him. His eyes swept the small circle, took in the tension, then settled on Zephyra. "You're building already," he murmured. "I'm trying," Zephyra said. Ezra listened as Zephyra repeated the plan in fewer words. Caches. Beyond the settlement. Rendezvous points. Mobile decoy teams. Signals standardized across every group. Stones, bones, bark strips, bird calls. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was silent long enough that Zephyra felt the weight of his judgment like a hand on her throat. Then Ezra nodded once, slow. "That's bigger," he said. "That's dangerous." Zephyra held steady. "So is staying small," she replied. Ezra's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "All right," he said. "We do it, but we do it with rules tighter than rope." He looked at the others. "Solomon, you pick cache points near water. Cora, you train the children on new signals, only the oldest. Maybe you set decoy routes. Zephyra," his eyes returned to her, "you choose your teams, and choose carefully. One wrong person, and your net becomes their noose." That was Ezra's trust, permission with a blade hidden inside. By dusk, the first decoy team was formed. Not many. 3. Zephyra chose Anaya first, not because Anaya was easiest, but because Anaya was hungry for purpose, and fast enough to turn fear into motion. She chose Solomon second, because he knew the forest's old bones, and could disappear inside it. For the third, she chose Mara. Mara's eyes widened when Zephyra said her name. "Me?" Mara whispered, as if she'd misheard. "Yes," Zephyra said. Mara's fingers tightened around the cloth she was holding. "I'll mess up," she breathed. I'll make noise." Zephyra stepped close enough that Mara could see her eyes clearly. "You already learned silence," Zephyra whispered. "Now you learn courage that moves." Ruth looked uneasy, protective instinct flaring. "She's young," Ruth murmured. "So am I to them," Mara whispered back, surprising herself with the firmness in her tone. She swallowed. "I can do it." Zephyra nodded once. "You do it because you're small enough to slip where others can't," she said, "and because you care enough to watch details." Mara looked down, then lifted her chin, shaky but determined. "Okay," she whispered. The plan for the first decoy run was simple: create the illusion of a moving group heading north along the river's bends, then doubling back west toward a stand of pines Briggs's men had searched before. Leave signs, broken twigs, faint ash smears, a dropped strip of cloth, just enough to be found, enough to tempt, then vanish. Before they left, Zephyra taught them one more signal, a scratch mark carved into bark in the shape of a crooked crescent. It meant Briggs is here, not hunters in general. Briggs specifically. "Only use it if you're sure," Zephyra said, "because if you carve fear into trees too often, nobody believes the tree." Solomon snorted softly at that, approval hidden behind humor. They slipped out after full dark, leaving Briar Hollow quiet and tight. Maybe watched them go from the boundary notch, her eyes flat with worry she would never admit. Hours passed. Inside the settlement, Zephyra couldn't sit still. She worked, moving caches, reinforcing a thorn line, resetting trip ropes. Every task was a way to keep her hands from reaching for panic. Micah, now stronger, insisted on helping carry small bundles. Eli tried to keep him from overdoing it, grumbling, but Micah's stubbornness was brighter than his sickness had been. Near midnight, the danger call came again, faint this time, from far out beyond the skin. 3 clicks. Long pause. 1 click, not inside, not close, but near enough. Ezra and Maybe went to the watch notch. Zephyra followed, silent, heart pounding. In the far distance, beyond the decoy trail zone, lantern light flickered like fireflies, moving in a line. Too many lanterns for one patrol. The light drifted, stopped, drifted again. "They're back," Maybe whispered. Ezra's jaw tightened. "They never left," he murmured. "They just widened." Zephyra watched the lanterns and felt her mind stretch. If Briggs was near, he had brought more. If he brought more, he wasn't just hunting a Runawa. Why settlement anymore? He was hunting a story like Briar Hollow couldn't be allowed to exist, because it made the enslaved imagine something worse than escape. Community. The lantern line split. One cluster moved toward the river. Another angled west. Zephyra's throat went dry. West was toward one of the old decoy shelters, toward the path Anaya and Solomon were meant to paint with false signs. "Who goes?" Zephyra looked at her people, at the ones who had already learned to move as a unit without looking like one. "Small teams," she said. "One builds False Heart north, one east, one west, far enough from us that if they burn, we breathe. They leave signs that look like we fled into those directions." Maybe's jaw worked. "And if Briggs sees the trick?" Zephyra's eyes narrowed. "Then we make the trick hurt," she said. Silence. Even Maybe didn't immediately bite back. Eli spoke, unexpectedly steady. "You mean traps?" he whispered. Zephyra nodded. "Not to kill," she said. "To slow, to scare, to make them step wrong, waste daylight, waste confidence." Ezra turned away from the watch notch and made a signal. People began to gather in small, controlled groups. The settlement did not panic. It shifted. Zephyra spent the next 2 days building lies. They worked under canopy and in ravines. They used old ash and damp wood to create smoke that would rise thin and steady without flaring bright. They stomped false paths with branches tied to ankles to mimic many feet. They placed broken tools where hunters would find them and imagined desperation. They built crude shelter frames that looked freshly abandoned. They even left bits of cloth, carefully chosen, not too much, so it wouldn't scream trap, caught on thorns like careless fleeing. Each false heart was placed where wind would carry smoke toward likely patrol routes. Each was linked with signs, bone stacks, bark marks, stones arranged in the same language Briar Hollow used, because hunters had likely seen those now and would be hungry to interpret them. Zephyra hated that part. Every sign was a language meant for freedom, and now it would be read by men who wanted to choke it. But she reminded herself language could be used against its enemy. On the 3rd morning, the hunters came, not into Briar Hollow, not yet, but into the web Zephyra had laid. A runner, one of the older children trained as a watcher, returned with eyes wide and breath controlled. He did not speak loudly. He simply made the signal, human, many, moving toward the north false heart. Maybe's face hardened. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Solomon exhaled. Zephyra felt a strange sensation, not joy, not relief, but a cold, fierce focus. Her plan was being tested. They climbed to a high ridge notch where they could see distant movement without being seen. Far off, lanterns flickered in daytime like pale glints. Men moved in a cluster toward where smoke rose faintly. "They're taking it," Ruth whispered. "Wait," Ezra murmured. They watched as the cluster reached the false camp. Even from a distance, Zephyra could see the way they spread, rifles angled, bodies tense with excitement. They believed they had found something. Then a smaller group broke away and ran east, toward the second false heart. "They think we split," Solomon whispered. Zephyra nodded. "Let them," she murmured. Hours later, another runner came. Briggs had been seen at the west false heart, Scarneck, smiling. "He's following the smoke," Mara whispered, voice trembling. He's chasing our breath." Zephyra placed a hand briefly on Mara's shoulder, grounding her. "He's chasing lies," Zephyra whispered. "That's better than him chasing children." By evening, smoke appeared in 2 new places, fresh, thicker, angrier. The hunters had set fires near the false hearts, trying to flush bodies that weren't there. Zephyra watched the smoke rise and felt Ezra's warning become real. Burn the woods. They were practicing on the lies. Ezra stared at the smoke a long time. Then he looked at Zephyra. "Your net bought us time," he said. "Time, a thin thing, but precious." Zephyra's voice was low. "Now we use the time," she said. Ezra nodded once. "We scatter caches farther," he murmured. "We train more watchers. We prepare routes out of forest entirely." Zephyra felt the future widen, heavy and unavoidable. "And we start pulling runaways toward the net," she said. "Not toward one hollow, toward the whole web." Maybe's eyes narrowed. "That will make us visible," she warned. Zephyra met her gaze. "We're visible already," she said. "The question is whether we become a single target or 100. That night, as Briar Hollow moved deeper into its second ring and the false hearts burned in the distance, Zephyra stood alone under the canopy and listened to the forest. She could smell smoke. She could hear the faint crackle of far-off fire carried on wind. She could hear, too, the soft clicking signals of watchers moving, the disciplined breathing of people who had decided not to die quietly. Somewhere out there, Briggs was learning a new frustration. He could chase smoke and still find nothing. He could burn brush and still not reveal the heart. He would not accept that for long. Zephyra closed her eyes and pictured the plantation again, not as a place she missed, but as a system she understood. Owners relied on certainty, that bodies belonged to them, that fear would keep everyone in line, that escape was lonely and temporary. Briar Hollow was already breaking that certainty. The web would shatter it. When she opened her eyes, she felt something settle inside her, an identity sharper than survival. She was no longer only a woman who had vanished. She was a woman building a rebellion out of silence, smoke, and misdirection, and Briggs, for all his patience, had finally stepped into her kind of war. Smoke became a second sky. It drifted in thin, pale ribbons at first, easy to ignore if you wanted to pretend the world could not change. Then it thickened, turning the sunlight dull and bruised. The forest carried the smell of scorched brush for days, and every throat in Briar Hollow learned what it meant to breathe carefully. Children coughed and were hushed gently, as if sound itself might invite flame. Briggs had lit his first fires to test the wind, his second fires to test their fear. Now, as the false hearts burned and yielded nothing but ash, his patience sharpened into something more dangerous than anger, certainty that someone was making him look foolish on purpose. Men like Briggs didn't forgive that. They punished it. Zephyra stood at a ridge notch with Ezra and Maybe and watched the smoke thread between trees like a living thing. Below, Briar Hollow moved deeper into its second ring, quiet, disciplined, already adapting. Caches were redistributed, signals were updated. The web Zephyra built began to feel less like an idea and more like a creature with many limbs. But the smoke did not stop. On the third day after the false hearts burned, a runner returned with eyes wide and lips cracked. He didn't speak, he signaled many humans. Widespread, slow sweep. Ezra's jaw tightened. "He's not chasing now," he murmured. "He's combing." Zephyra felt the shape of it instantly, a broad line of men walking shoulder to shoulder, burning small patches to clear undergrowth, forcing the forest to become a map instead of a hiding place. You couldn't outsmart a comb forever if you had only one hollow to protect. So Zephyra made the decision she had been circling for days, the one that would terrify them and save them at the same time. "We don't wait for his sweep," she whispered. Maybe's eyes snapped to her. "We can't outrun a wide line," she hissed. We don't outrun it, Zephyra said. We slip through it. Ezra's gaze sharpened. Explain! Zephyra kept her voice low, steady. The web isn't just decoys, she said. It's roots. He expects us to move like prey, away from him in one direction. But if his men spread, they thin, and thin means gaps. Maby's mouth tightened. Gaps with rifles, she whispered. Zephyra nodded once. Gaps with men who are tired, afraid of the woods, and sure they're hunting people who won't fight back. Ezra watched the smoke, then the line of trees, then Zephyra. You're saying we cut through, he said, not quite believing it. Aye. Saying we scatter through, Zephyra corrected. Small groups, trained, each group heads to a rendezvous point already prepared. We leave behind nothing worth burning. Maby's eyes narrowed. And the children? Zephyra's throat tightened. The children go first, she said. With the quietest adults, under cover of night, they take the deepest roots and the safest caches. Ezra's voice was flat. Moving in the night with children gets them killed. Staying in one place while he burns gets them killed too, Zephyra replied. Silence stretched thin. Ezra's face did not soften, but his eyes changed, acceptance mixed with dread. He was an old survivor. He knew when the forest stopped being a shield and started becoming a trap. All right, Ezra said finally, we do it, tonight. When the sun dropped and the smoke-hazed twilight began, Briar Hollow became a hive with its light hidden. People moved in whisper-quiet lines. They packed only what mattered, water gourds, cloth bundles of dried food, flint, cord, herbs, a few tools that could dig or cut. They buried what they couldn't carry and marked the burial sites with signals only Briar Hollow knew how to read. Zephyra moved through the settlement like a pulse, checking faces, assigning group leaders, repeating signals with hands and clicks. She watched Mara and saw how the girl's fear now lived beside her competence, not instead of it. She watched Micah, fully upright now, still too thin, eyes too bright, argue softly with Ruth that he could walk. Ruth's hand squeezed his shoulder like a promise and a warning. Eli approached Zephyra, his stubbornness stripped down to something raw. You sure? He whispered. Zephyra looked at him. No, she said honestly, but I'm sure staying is worse. Eli swallowed. If we get caught, then we get caught moving, Zephyra finished. Not waiting. He nodded once and Zephyra felt a strange gratitude. Eli had fought her rules at first. Now he carried them like they belonged to him too. Maybe moved near the boundary notch, eyes scanning, knife at her belt. She made a quick hand sign to Zephyra. Scouts confirmed gaps in the sweep line, thin spots near the river bend. Men clustered more heavily toward smoke and decoys. Briggs, Zephyra realized, was still chasing the idea of the heart. He believed the settlement was one point. Even now his mind couldn't fully accept that it had become many. That was their advantage. The first group left, children in the middle, 2 adults in front, 2 behind, no talking, only signals. They slipped out through the deeper gate, one only a handful of people knew, and vanished into brush so dense it swallowed their shapes. Zephyra watched them go until she could no longer see even the darkness shift. Then the second group, then the third. By the time Zephyra's group prepared to move, Briar Hollow felt hollow indeed, like a shell already abandoned. Only a few adults remained behind in the second ring, those trained to erase traces, to refresh the skin one last time so hunters would waste time searching the wrong shape. Ezra remained, of course. Ezra would not leave last. Ezra had to be the last. A community like this often required someone who would rather be caught than leave the slowest behind. Zephyra approached him in the darkness. You don't have to stay, she whispered. Ezra's eyes stayed on the boundary. Yes, he said. I do. Zephyra clenched her jaw. Then you come with my last group, she said, not alone. Ezra's mouth twitched. You giving orders now? I'm preventing funerals, Zephyra replied. Ezra stared at her, then gave the smallest nod. Fine, he whispered, but if it goes wrong, I cut the rope. Zephyra knew what he meant. If they were cornered, he would not let panic turn them into a loud clumped target. He would force scattering, even if it meant losing someone. That was Ezra's mercy. It was brutal, but it was the kind of mercy this world allowed. They moved just after mid. Night. Zephyra led with Solomon and Cora. Behind them came Ruth, Mara, Micah, Eli, and Ezra. Anaya and Maby flanked, taking wider angles, slipping between trees like shadows that had learned to sharpen themselves. The sisters and Isaiah had already left with earlier groups. Zephyra felt their absence like missing fingers. The forest felt different when you walked it, knowing it might be on fire tomorrow. Every leaf seemed loud, every owl call sounded like an omen. Zephyra kept the pace steady, not fast. Speed made noise, steady made survival. They approached the sweep line near the river bend where Maybe's scouts had reported thin coverage. The air here smelled less of smoke, more of river damp and mud. Zephyra signaled freeze. Everyone became still. In the distance she heard it. Boots, low voices, the clink of metal. A lantern flickered briefly through trees. A patrol. Zephyra waited, listening to the rhythm of their steps, not marching, wandering. Men tired and annoyed, convinced the forest was wasting their time. She made the move signal, one click, then a pause. They began sliding forward again, each person stepping in the footprints of the one ahead where possible, compressing signs into a single narrow line. At the edge of the sweep gap, Zephyra stopped and crouched. She pressed her palm to the ground. The earth vibrated faintly with distant footfalls. She watched the brush, the shadows, the places where men would likely stand to see down a line. Then she saw it, a break in the line. A space between two patrol clusters, wide enough for a single file group if they moved with patience. Zephyra signaled, "Go, slow." They entered the gap. For several heartbeats nothing happened. Only the river's hush, the insects, the breath held in throats. Then Micah stumbled. It was small, his foot caught on a root, and his breath hitched. But in a world this tense, the sound felt huge. Ruth grabbed his arm instantly, steadying him. Micah clamped his mouth shut, eyes wide with horror at himself. From the left, a voice snapped quietly. "Who's there?" A lantern lifted. Light cut between trees, a thin blade of yellow. Zephyra's body went cold. She didn't move. She didn't run. Running would turn the lantern into pursuit. The lantern bobbed closer, the man behind it squinting. "Probably a damn deer," another voice muttered. "Deer don't breathe like that," the first man hissed. The lantern swung toward their patch of brush. The light caught Ruth's knuckles, pale against dark bark, for the briefest flash. The man stiffened. Zephyra moved, not toward him, toward the opposite direction. She took a small stone from her pocket, one she'd carried exactly for this, and snapped it hard against a tree trunk across the gap. The crack echoed sharp, like a branch breaking under weight. Then, immediately, Zephyra made a short, frantic rustle in that direction, just enough to suggest something big moving. The lantern snapped away from Ruth's hand and swung toward the sound. "There!" the man barked. Boots shifted. The lantern moved fast, chasing the wrong noise. Zephyra signaled, "Move now." They slid forward, silent, urgent, their bodies becoming part of the gap's darkness. Maybe and Anaya disappeared into wider angles, ensuring no one saw the group as one. They cleared the sweep line. Only once they had moved far enough that the lantern light could no longer reach did Zephyra allow herself to breathe fully. Her lungs burned, her heart hammered, but they were through. Ezra's voice came, a whisper close to her ear. "You're teaching the forest to lie," he murmured. Zephyra didn't answer. She couldn't. She was listening. Behind them, the patrol cursed and argued. The lantern bobbed. Someone laughed, frustrated. Another voice grumbled about wasting time on shadows. Then the sounds faded as they moved deeper toward the false noise. Zephyra's trick had worked. Not because it was brilliant, but because it was believable. Hunters believed movement more than silence. They chased what they could imagine. They traveled until dawn, pushing toward the first rendezvous point, a hollow near a marshy bend where Solomon had placed caches. As the sky lightened, fog rose from the ground. It covered them like a gift. They arrived to find others already there. Nella and June huddled under a low lean-to made of branches, their faces streaked with mud and relief. Isaiah sat nearby, eyes red from exhaustion, holding a crude spear. Another small group of Briar Hollow people, one Zephyra did not know well, sat in a tight cluster, eyes wide, children pressed between adults. When Zephyra stepped into view, heads lifted, shoulders loosened. It wasn't worship. It was recognition. This woman had become a direction. Ruth exhaled a sound that was almost a sob. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Micah sank to his knees, shaking from fatigue, and then laughed silently, the sound trapped in his chest like a prayer he refused to speak aloud. They were together, not all. Zephyra knew that. Not yet. The web had many points, and some groups would take longer. Some might never arrive. That was the cruel truth of scattering. Zephyra did not let herself drown in that truth. She used it. She gathered the adults in a tight circle. Ezra, Solomon, Maybe, Cora, Ruth, Eli, Anaya, Isaiah, faces tired, eyes sharp. "We don't go back," Zephyra whispered. Anaya's head snapped up. We built a blueprint, Zephyra cut in. And Briggs will burn that hollow until he feels satisfied. Let him burn emptiness. Ezra's eyes narrowed. You want to abandon Briar Hollow? Zephyra held his gaze. I want to stop giving them one place to kill, she said. Briar Hollow was a beginning. Now it becomes a story we spread. Maby's jaw clenched. A story gets people hunted. A story also pulls runaways toward something real, Zephyr replied. Not a single camp, a network. Solomon looked tired, but his eyes were bright with the harsh light of understanding. She's right, he murmured. If they can find one hollow, they can find it again. But if the hollow is gone and the roots remain... Cora nodded slowly. Then they chase smoke forever, she said. Ezra stared at Zephyr a long moment. The old man's pride and caution were deep, but so was his intelligence. He had survived by adapting, not by clinging. Finally he spoke. What do you call it? He asked quietly. Zephyr blinked. What? The network, Ezra said. If it's not Briar Hollow, what is it? Zephyr looked around at the gathered faces, runaways, survivors, children who had learned silence, men and women who had stopped seeing themselves as lost prey. She thought of the stone stacks by the river, the bone caches, the crescent mark carved into bark. She thought of the web. Zephyra's net, Mara whispered suddenly, as if the words had been waiting in her throat. Zephyra's chest tightened. She looked at Mara. The girl's eyes were shining, but her chin was lifted, steady. It wasn't worship. It was naming, a way to make something real enough to hold on to. Zephyra started to protest. Names attracted attention, names became targets. But then Micah, still kneeling, whispered hoarsely, A net catches people before they drown. And Ruth, voice trembling with exhaustion and stubborn hope, murmured, A net means nobody has to run alone. Zephyra swallowed. Her voice came out quiet. Then a net, she agreed. Ezra nodded once as if sealing a pact. Then we build it proper, he said. Rules, signals, caches, routes, and we keep it tighter than any chain. Zephyra looked toward the horizon where smoke still stained the sky faintly. Somewhere behind that line, Briggs would find Briar Hollow empty. He would rage. He would burn brush. He would swear the forest was mocking him. He would not understand, immediately, that the forest wasn't mocking him. A woman who had stopped being only an escape. She was an architect of Disa. Appearance. That day they moved again, not as one desperate group, but as coordinated limbs of a creature. Zephyra sent teams along different routes to check other rendezvous points, retrieve caches, pull in stragglers. She sent Solomon and Cora to restack stones near the river in a new pattern, not come here, but move through. She sent Maby to teach signals to the older children at each point, how to warn without speaking, how to erase without leaving emptiness suspicious, how to read the forest like scripture. As the sun dipped, more groups arrived, tired faces, new names, stories of near captures and narrow gaps, and the smell of fire behind them. Some arrived with nothing but their bodies. Some arrived carrying a child asleep in their arms. Each arrival tightened the net. Zephyra stood at the edge of the marsh and watched the gathered people settle into disciplined quiet. It was not comfort. It was not peace. It was a new form of resistance, coordinated survival. Mara came to stand beside her, eyes fixed on the distant smoke. Do you think he'll stop? She whispered. Zephyra shook her head slowly. No, she said. He'll come harder. Mara swallowed. Then, what do we do? Zephyra stared into the darkening trees and felt the answer settle like iron, cold and steady. We keep making him chase, she said. We keep making him waste men and time and fire until the owners decide he costs more than we're worth. She glanced down at Mara. And while he's chasing, we build. Mara's breath came out shaky, almost a laugh. Build what? Zephyra looked back at the gathered community. Children, elders, fighters, healers, watchers, people who had been told their entire lives that they were alone and powerless. Something they can't reclaim, Zephyra whispered. Not just bodies. The smoke thinned slightly as night fell, and the forest's true darkness returned. Somewhere far behind them, a hollow burned uselessly, its shelters already abandoned, its heart already moved. Briggs would wake tomorrow with ash under his nails and anger in his mouth, and Zephyra would wake with a net stretching wider than one patch of woods, held together by signals and discipline and the quiet determination of people who had learned to vanish together. She closed her eyes for a moment, not sleeping, just listening. The forest was still alive, and so were they.